I never imagined that at 44, I'd be having sex with a girl 20 years younger than me. And I certainly didn't expect it to be out of revenge. But that's the thing about life. Just when you think you've seen it all, it throws you a curveball. A vicious, gut-wrenching curveball. But before I get ahead of myself, let me start from the beginning. Let me introduce myself. My name's Sam. Middle-aged, average guy, nothing too special to write about, at least not until all this went down. I've been married to Melissa for 16 years. We met in our late 20s back when I was more optimistic and had fewer grays. She was the type of woman who could light up a room, make anyone feel important, and frankly, I liked that. Made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. Our marriage? Well, it was what it was. Not perfect, but then again, what marriage is. We had our ups and downs, but I never thought it was anything we couldn't handle. We weren't the couple who fawned over each other all the time, and sure, we had our share of fights, but we'd always find our way back. Or so I thought. Now, I know I was just another naive husband thinking everything would be fine as long as we pushed through. And then there's Jason, my so-called best friend. We've known each other for nearly 20 years, ever since we worked together back in the day. The guy's been through hell. Lost his wife in a car accident about 10 years ago. Left him with his daughter, Emma, who was just 10 at the time. I remember how broken he was. That first year, he was barely functioning. Melissa and I were there for him every step of the way, especially Melissa. She really took on a motherly role with Emma, almost like she was trying to fill the void left behind by Jason's wife. Emma was always over at our house. She practically grew up there. She called me Uncle Sam, and over time, she got comfortable enough to confide in me things she wouldn't tell her dad. You know how it is. Teenagers don't always feel comfortable sharing everything with their parents. I thought of her like a little sister, and she probably saw me as more of an older brother than anything else. She'd come to me with her teenage drama, boys' school, all that stuff. Jason appreciated it. At least I thought he did. We lived close by, so they'd often drop by unannounced, just like family. It was normal. Hell, Jason was practically a fixture in our home. But what I never realized was that this familiarity would turn into something way darker. One day, it all came crashing down. I wasn't supposed to be home that day. I'd been at work grinding through the usual when this sharp stomach pain hit me out of nowhere. My boss, a decent guy, told me to take the rest of the day off and head home. So I did, thinking I'd crawl into bed and sleep it off. Except I never made it to my bed, because when I pulled into my driveway, Jason's car was parked there. Again, not weird. He'd often leave it there when he'd drop by, grab a drink, or talk shop with me. But something felt off. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but something was gnawing at me. The front door was locked. Now, that wasn't like Melissa. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where no one locked doors during the day, especially if we had guests over. But there it was, locked. So I pulled out my keys, walked in, and everything was silent. Too silent. And then I heard it, faint at first, but unmistakable. The sounds of moaning, gasps, and muffled words. My heart stopped. My brain couldn't process it. No, no, no. This isn't happening. But I didn't think. I just acted. My legs carried me upstairs, moving faster than my brain could catch up. I walked down that hallway, and every step felt like I was stepping into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I didn't go up there unarmed either. Grabbing the bat from the closet on the way up, I knew someone was about to pay for this. When I reached the bedroom door, I stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then I pushed it open. I wasn't ready for what I saw. There she was, my wife of 16 years, straddling my best friend. They froze. They saw me standing there, bat in hand, and the color drained from their faces. Melissa's mouth hung open, but no words came out. Jason scrambled off the bed like a scared rat. I didn't say a word. I just walked up to him and swung the bat to the floor, hard enough to crack the wood. He flinched, but I wasn't aiming for him. Not yet. I didn't need to say anything. The betrayal was plastered across both of their faces. Melissa, ever the manipulator, finally found her voice. Sam, wait. Don't Don't do anything stupid, please. Let's talk. 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 After this, I dropped the bat on the floor and punched Jason square in the face. Then again, and again. The third punch split his lip, blood dribbling down his chin. Melissa screamed, trying to pull me off him, but I was too far gone to care. What the fuck, man? Jason finally spat out, eyes wide in panic. Sam, it's not what it looks like. How long? I growled, my voice shaking. How long has this been going on? Neither of them could answer me. Pathetic. I didn't wait for their excuses. I left. I grabbed the bat, walked out the front door, and smashed the windshield of Jason's car, dented the hood, and broke the side mirrors. The whole time I just kept thinking, how the hell did it come to this? I got in my own car and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, but then it hit me. I needed a drink. No, I needed to get fucking hammered. So I drove to the bar. The one place where everything always made sense, where the world didn't feel so twisted. I walked into the bar, still gripping the bat in my hand, like it was my last line of defense against the chaos my life had turned into. The regulars were there, nursing their drinks, lost in their own problems. I didn't say a word as I sat down at the counter, but I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. It wasn't every day you saw a guy like me show up at noon, especially looking the way I did, like I'd just come back from war. Whiskey, I muttered, not even glancing up at the bartender. I didn't need to. He already knew. Gary was his name. Good guy. Seen a lot of shit over the years. He'd been working at that bar for as long as I could remember, always there with a wisecrack or a shoulder to lean on, depending on what you needed. He didn't ask questions. Just poured the whiskey and set the glass in front of me. I downed it in one gulp, the burn barely registering as it hit my throat. By the time I ordered my third glass, Gary leaned in a little closer, raising an eyebrow. Everything all right, Sam? Not like you to show up here before the sun's down. His voice had that steady calm, like he'd heard 1,000 sob stories before. But there was a hint of concern in there, too. Nobody had ever seen me like this. Not in all the years I'd been coming here. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. You ever walking on your wife fucking your best friend? Gary's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't look surprised. Like he'd heard it all before. Shit, he said, letting out a low whistle. That's rough, man. Rough doesn't even begin to cover it. I muttered, swirling the whiskey in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. I stared at it like it might give me some kind of answer, like it could somehow make sense of everything. But it didn't. Nothing did. I don't know why I told him everything. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe I just needed to get it out of my system before it ate me alive. But I told him every single thing. I told him about walking in on them, the look on their faces, the sound of that bat cracking against the floor. I told him about smashing Jason's car, about the punches, about how I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Gary listened, didn't interrupt. When I was done, he patted me on the shoulder, his hand heavy but comforting. That's a shitty situation, man. No other way to put it. I nodded, staring at the empty glass in front of me. Shitty didn't even cover it. But listen, Gary continued, leaning in a little closer. The main thing here is not to break down. Don't let them win. I looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. What would you do if you were me? Gary didn't miss a beat. Me? Well, I'd probably do what you're doing now. Get drunk off my ass, maybe break something. Hell, let's make that official. He grabbed a glass, poured himself a whiskey, and clinked it against mine. To shitty friends and cheating wives. I smirked at that, the first genuine emotion I'd felt all day. We both downed our drinks in one go. But after that, he continued, setting his glass down with a thud. I want revenge. The kind that leaves them with nothing. Take everything from them. Your wife, your so-called friend. Make them regret the day they ever crossed you. I stared at him. His words hit me harder than the whiskey. Revenge. It was what I wanted, wasn't it? To make them suffer. To tear their lives apart the way they'd torn mine. I'll do it, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm going to take them down. Leave them with nothing. Gary gave me a nod of approval. but his face softened a bit. Just be smart about it, Sam. You're a good guy. Don't let this turn you into something you're not. By the time the hours had passed, I was so drunk I couldn't see straight. I didn't know how I was going to get home, and honestly, I didn't care. I was too lost in my thoughts, in the haze of whiskey and rage. Gary must have seen it. Before I could even think about stumbling out to my car, he slid his hand across the counter and snatched my keys. You're not driving anywhere, Sam. Pick these up when you're sober. I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth was, I was in no condition to fight. So I just nodded and slumped back onto the stool. Taxi's on the way, Gary said, already on the phone. When the cab showed up, I barely made it into the back seat without falling over. The driver didn't say a word, thank God. He just drove, and I spent the whole ride staring out the window, the city blurring by like it wasn't even real. I don't remember much after that. Just stumbling through the front door of my house, the place where it all started. It felt so empty, like a hollow shell of the life I used to have. I collapsed onto the couch, still fully dressed, and passed out. The next morning, I woke up with the worst hangover of my life. My head felt like it had been run over by a truck. My mouth was dry as hell, and every muscle in my body ached. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. By the time I crawled off the couch that afternoon, my head was still pounding from the hangover. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I knew what I had to do next. The divorce wasn't just going to happen by itself. I needed to start taking action. I grabbed my phone and called the first divorce lawyer I could think of. A guy named Rick I'd met a few years back at a work event. We talked here and there, and I knew he handled ugly situations like mine. Rick, it's Sam. I need to talk about a divorce. I said flatly, not in the mood for small talk. Damn, Sam. I didn't expect this call from you, Rick said, his voice somewhere between surprised and sympathetic. All right, give me the rundown. I gave him the basics, Melissa, the infidelity, how long we'd been married. I didn't hold back on the details. Not with Rick. He needed to know everything if I was going to make sure Melissa didn't walk away with a damn thing. When I hung up, I felt a little better. Just a little. That's when I saw it. Melissa's laptop sitting on the dining room table. Her work laptop. She had some big presentation the next day. She'd been talking about it for weeks. It was the type of thing that could make or break her standing in the company, and I knew how much she'd been stressing over it. And then it hit me, a way to take my revenge, to make her life just a little bit harder. I sat down and opened the laptop, skimming through her files until I found the presentation. I wasn't some tech wizard, but I knew enough to make a few changes that would screw things up for her. I scrolled through the slides, trying to figure out where to strike. And then I had the idea. Melissa's meeting was with some executives from a Korean company. I did a quick Google search, found some offensive stuff that could rub them the wrong way. Subtle, but enough to cause awkwardness. I placed it smack in the middle of the presentation, hidden just enough that it wouldn't be caught until it was too late. I also threw in a few indecent images, strategically placing them toward the center of the slides. Not right at the start where she'd catch it during a quick skim, but far enough in that she'd be caught off guard in the middle of her big moment. I wasn't going to ruin just her marriage. I was going to mess with her whole life. My head was still throbbing, so I popped a couple of painkillers and lay down. By the evening, I felt better, just in time for Melissa to come home. She walked in like nothing had happened, probably thinking she could talk her way out of this mess like she always did. Sam, we need to talk, she started, her voice calm, but with that edge to it that I'd come to hate. I didn't even look at her. Go to hell, Melissa. We're getting a divorce. She didn't miss a beat. You're a fool, she spat, crossing her arms, probably thinking I'd just cooled down after a while, like this was some petty argument about money or dinner plans. We'll see who the fool is, I snapped back, standing up and heading out to the porch. I didn't have anywhere to go. Neither did she. The house was big enough for both of us, but that night, it felt like a prison. There was no way I was going to sleep next to her, so I figured I'd just crash on the couch again. But as it turned out, I didn't even make it through the night at home. It was a few hours after midnight when my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was another spam call, but then I saw the name on the screen, Emma. Jason's daughter. I answered, my voice groggy. Hello? At first, I couldn't make out what she was saying. Her words were slurred, jumbled. But after a minute, it became clear. She was drunk. Very drunk. She'd been at some party and couldn't get home. So she called me, of all people, to pick her up. She didn't want her dad to know, and I guess I was the only one she thought she could trust. So I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and headed out. When I arrived at the address she'd given me, Emma was leaning against a wall, barely able to stand. The smell of alcohol hit me from a mile away as she stumbled toward the car. I opened the door for her, and she practically fell into the passenger seat. "What the hell, Emma?" I said, more out of concern than anger. "This isn't like you." She waved me off, her head lolling against the seat. My boyfriend. He cheated on me," she mumbled, almost crying but still with that strange smile on her face. Drunk, emotional, and confused. It was a mess. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. I knew exactly what that felt like. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. She turned toward me, her drunken curiosity piqued. "Who else?" I sighed and told her, in short, about what had happened with Melissa and Jason. I didn't go into the ugly details, but it was enough for her to get the picture. "Oh, Uncle Sam," she whispered, leaning closer, her hand landing on my leg. "I'm so sorry." At first, I thought she was just being comforting, but her hand didn't stop there. It moved slowly up and down my leg, and I felt my whole body tense. "Emma, stop," I said, taking her hand and moving it away. But she didn't stop. She kept touching me, her drunken flirtation obvious now. "I want to make you feel better," she whispered, her hand wandering back to my thigh. I resisted. I really did. But the anger, the betrayal, the alcohol, it all came crashing together. I don't know when, but at some point I stopped caring. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was just the alcohol talking. But when she unzipped my fly and bent down, I didn't stop her. She was good. I wasn't thinking about Jason or Melissa anymore. Just the moment, the twisted satisfaction of knowing I was crossing a line I could never uncross. When she was done, she leaned back and smiled, her lipstick smeared, her makeup a mess. "There's a hotel nearby," she said, her voice low and suggestive. "You don't want to go home, and neither do I." I didn't argue. We went to the hotel and spent the rest of the night in bed, doing things I never thought I'd be capable of with Emma. I was 44, but that night, age didn't seem to matter. Somehow, I kept up. In the morning, she woke me up, grinning. "Let's take a picture," she said, grabbing my phone since hers was dead. I don't know why, but I let her. She posed with her makeup smeared across her face, and I snapped the picture, her lipstick still on my skin. Afterward, we fell back into bed, and by morning, when the hangover hit again, reality came crashing back down. I felt off, like I'd crossed a point of no return. I didn't regret it, but I knew things were only going to get messier from here. When we stepped out of the hotel into the sharp morning light, it felt surreal. The kind of morning where everything should feel normal, but the weight of what had just happened hung in the air like a storm cloud. Emma was the first to break the silence, lighting a cigarette and blowing out a long stream of smoke. Not a care in the world. "You know," she said casually, like she was talking about the weather, "you could show that picture to my dad." I stopped mid-step, staring at her. "What?" She took another drag, looking at me sideways with a grin that didn't match the seriousness of what she was saying. "I mean it. You could show him that picture of me. I don't give a fuck anymore." I shook my head, trying to understand what the hell she was getting at. "Why the hell would you want me to do that?" Emma shrugged, still grinning like this was some kind of game. "I've been wanting to get away from him for years. He won't let me go. Every time I even mention moving out or living my own life, he hits me with the whole, 'you won't survive without me' bullshit. I'm sick of it, Sam. Maybe if he sees the picture, he'll finally get it. Maybe he'll let me live my life." I just stared at her, the gravity of her words sinking in. This wasn't some spoiled, rebellious thing. This was years of being under Jason's thumb, feeling trapped, suffocated by her own father. And she was willing to use me, use what we'd done, to blow her life apart if it meant she could finally escape. I'm not going to do that, I said, but the truth was, the thought had already crossed my mind. It was just one more way to stick it to Jason, one more way to tear everything apart. Suit yourself, she said, flicking the cigarette but into the gutter. She didn't seem to care either way, like the consequences didn't even matter anymore. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me. I dropped her off at her house, and we didn't say much more. The whole drive back, her words echoed in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo. The image of her makeup smeared across her face, her lipstick still staining my skin. It was like a ticking time bomb, waiting to blow everything apart. And part of me wanted that explosion. I wanted to burn every bridge, leave nothing but ashes in my wake. When I got home, I felt the tension in the air before I even walked in. Melissa's laptop was still sitting on the dining room table, a silent reminder of the revenge I'd set in motion. She had no idea what she was walking into that day. The presentation she'd been obsessing over for weeks, the one that could make or break her career. And now, I'd turned it into a disaster waiting to unfold. I didn't have to wait long. Melissa came home just before dinner, slamming the door so hard it rattled the pictures on the walls. She didn't even look at me. Her face was twisted in pure, unfiltered rage, and before I could say anything, she hurled the laptop across the room. It hit the wall with a crack, the screen shattering into pieces as it crashed to the floor. "You fucking idiot," she screamed, her voice hoarse with anger. "You did this, didn't you?" I didn't move from my spot on the couch, just stared at her with a calmness that I didn't really feel. "Maybe." She stormed across the room, her face red, eyes wild. "You sabotaged my presentation, you asshole. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I didn't even flinch. "Yeah, I know exactly what I've done." Her hands were shaking, and for a second, I thought she might actually hit me. "They fired me, Sam. I got fired in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what that means? No company is going to touch me now. I'm finished." I raised an eyebrow. "Good." Her scream was a mix of rage and desperation, and she grabbed the back of a chair, throwing it to the side. "You ruined me. You've ruined everything. And for what? To get back at me? Well, fuck you, Sam, because guess what? I've been fucking Jason for years. We didn't even wait after his wife's funeral. You were too stupid to see it." That hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected betrayal. But the timeline? The fact that they started right after his wife's funeral? It felt like a whole new level of cruelty. My stomach twisted, ball rising in my throat. How the hell had I been so blind, so stupid for so long? They had been screwing each other while I was grieving with him, supporting him through his loss, and all the while they were betraying me behind my back. I stood up, fists clenched at my sides. "Go to hell, Melissa." She stormed off, slamming the door to the bedroom. And just like that, she was gone from my life, at least for the moment. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I sat back down, my mind still buzzing from everything that had happened. And that's when I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my messages until I found Jason's name. My finger hovered over the photo of Emma for just a second before I hit send. The image, her disheveled makeup, the look on her face, was now on its way to him. The final nail in the coffin. I didn't care what came next. I just wanted him to feel the pain, the betrayal, the chaos that had consumed my life. 15 minutes later, Jason's car screeched to a halt outside my house. He didn't even bother knocking. The door flew open, and he stormed in like a man possessed, his face twisted with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. "What the fuck is this, Sam?" he yelled, holding up his phone, the image of his daughter staring back at me. I didn't even stand up. "What the fuck do you think it is?" And that's when he lunged. His fist connected with my jaw, and I staggered back, but I swung right back at him. We crashed into the coffee table, shoving each other, punching, grabbing anything we could to do damage. It wasn't like in the movies. This was raw, primal. Two men, broken by betrayal, trying to hurt each other in the only way we knew how. At some point, We ended up on the floor, exhausted, bloodied, and bruised. We lay there, panting, staring up at the ceiling like two battered dogs who just fought to a stalemate. Neither of us said a word. What was there to say? We'd both fucked up our lives in different ways, and now we were just lying in the ruins. That's when I heard the sirens. 10 minutes later, the cops broke down the door. One of the neighbors must have seen us through the window, throwing punches, and called them in. They separated us, dragging us to our feet and out to the patrol cars. I spent a few hours at the station, mostly sitting in silence. Neither of us pressed charges. We were too tired, too worn out to keep fighting. Eventually, they let us go with nothing more than a warning. When I got home that night, something strange settled over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. Not better, exactly, but there was something about finally letting go of all the pent-up anger and pain that had been eating me alive. I didn't care about Melissa, Jason, or Emma anymore. They could all go to hell for all I cared. In the end, maybe I was the one who burned everything down. But after everything that had happened, I was okay with that. Sometimes, the only way to survive is to burn everything and walk away from the ashes. Melissa and I broke up faster than I expected. After all the chaos, there wasn't much left to salvage. There was no point in dragging it out. No love, no trust, just a hollow feeling where our marriage used to be. It was like watching a building burn to the ground and realizing, halfway through the fire, that there wasn't anything worth saving. We signed the papers, divided the assets, and went our separate ways. A few months passed, and we sold the house. That place used to be everything. Our home, the space where we planned our future, argued over stupid things, and even had some good memories once upon a time. But after everything that had happened, it felt more like a tomb. The walls still echoed with the arguments, the betrayal, and that final, ugly collapse. I was relieved when it sold. It meant I could finally close that chapter and move on. We both moved to different places. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It felt like a fresh start, something I could control. I didn't care where Melissa went. As long as it was far away, that was enough for me. I knew there was no chance of running into her at the grocery store or at any of the places we used to frequent. We both needed distance, and now we had it. Emma, though she surprised me, after we both went our separate ways, she really took charge of her life. She moved out of her dad's house, found a good job in another city, and started building her own life. I was proud of her in a strange way. We still talk sometimes, just casual conversations, nothing heavy. She checks in on me every once in a while, and I do the same. It's weird, though. We haven't seen each other in person since that night at the hotel, and I think we both know it's for the best. I never wanted to keep that going. Whatever happened between us was a one-time thing, fueled by anger and alcohol. We both needed an escape that night, but I wasn't looking to make it anything more. Some things are better left in the past. Melissa, on the other hand, didn't land on her feet quite as gracefully. The fallout from her botched presentation spread quickly. Word got around fast in her industry, and no one wanted to take a chance on her after that. Getting fired was one thing, but the rumors, the stories about what happened in that boardroom, it left her blacklisted. She tried finding work, but nothing stuck. I heard she bounced around a bit, but no company would touch her. No one wants to hire someone who humiliated themselves in front of a room full of executives. What really got to me was hearing about her and Jason. Yeah, after everything blew up, they tried to make it work. Maybe they thought that since they'd already destroyed their marriages, they had nothing left to lose. But the thing about a relationship built on lies is that it can't last. The spark they had while sneaking around behind my back burned out pretty quick when they had to face each other in the daylight. From what I heard, things went downhill fast. They both started drinking a lot. It became a nightly ritual, just the two of them in a toxic cycle of booze and bitterness. I guess they thought alcohol could help them forget, but it only made things worse. When you start drinking to drown out your problems, the only thing you end up drowning is yourself. It didn't take long for their relationship to implode. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that it all came to a head one night. They got into a nasty fight, worse than usual. Jason hit her, bad enough that she had to go to the hospital, and he ended up in jail. I don't know if she pressed charges, but he did time for it. I never asked for the details. Didn't care enough to find out. They got what was coming to them, one way or another. As for me, life started to look up. It wasn't a straight shot to happiness, but slowly, things began to get better. I've always been the type to think I could handle things on my own, that I didn't need help. But after everything that happened, I realized I couldn't carry all that weight by myself. The anger, the betrayal, the guilt, it was like a poison inside me, eating away at who I was. So I swallowed my pride and started seeing a psychologist. It wasn't easy at first, sitting there and spilling my guts to someone who didn't know me, didn't know what I'd been through. But after a few sessions, I realized I needed it. I needed someone to help me unpack all the shit I'd buried. It was like lifting a weight off my shoulders I didn't even know I was carrying. I also went back to the bar. Gary, the bartender, had been there for me from the beginning, even if he didn't know the full story. One night, after a couple of drinks, I finally told him everything about Melissa and Jason, about Emma, about the picture, the fight, all of it. I half expected him to judge me, to look at me like I was some kind of monster, but he didn't. He just listened, nodding along like he'd heard it all before. When I got to the part about sending Jason that picture of his daughter, Gary let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Man," he said, pouring us both a shot of whiskey, "that's one hell of a story." We clinked glasses and drank, and after that, we laughed about it. Not because it was funny. None of it really was, but because sometimes that's all you can do. You laugh because if you don't, the weight of it all will crush you. Looking back on everything, I've wondered more than once if I did the right thing. Was all the revenge worth it? Did it fix anything? No, probably not. But at the same time, it gave me closure in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever find. Melissa and Jason got what they deserved. Emma found her own way out. And me? I'm still standing. So, to everyone who stuck around to read this, thanks. I needed to get it off my chest, to tell the whole story from start to finish. Life's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel. But you deal with it, you move forward, and if you're lucky, you learn something from it. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But in the end, I'm still here, and I'm still moving forward. That's got to count for something, right? Good luck out there, folks. Life's a bitch, but sometimes you just got to laugh and keep going.
Darn it, I got too greedy. That final $2 million probably tipped them off. I should have just let it go. I sensed something fishy with that bill. Darn it. Now they're closing in, though they seem to think I'm unaware. This'll help. I still have time to vanish and ensure they can't track me any further. Good thing I had a plan for this. But who am I? And who's after me? My current identity doesn't matter. It's vanishing soon. In 2 hours, I'll transform completely. The trail the pursuers are following will lead to a dead end before they gather enough info to unmask me. What I am, or soon will be, is a hacker. A damn good one. And a furious one, with a short list of targets. I'm going after odd cartels, monitoring their finances and discreetly tipping off the authorities with incriminating evidence. Personally, I've nailed 4 politicians, at least 50 cops, a dozen soldiers across borders, and countless other turncoats. Plus, I've drained over $100 million from their accounts, keeping a cut for myself, but funneling about 80% to various charities, mostly aiding dependents and supporting rehab programs. Why, you wonder? It all started with my little sister getting mixed up with the wrong guy. I really didn't approve of him, but she wouldn't heed my warnings. I tried everything, but she made her choice. I did my best to look out for her after our folks passed away. I've always had a knack for computers. However, the 2 bleak years I spent in solitary despair after identifying what remained of her body elevated me from skilled to almost supernatural. Holed up in the basement of our parents' old place, I delved into dark secrets and mastered their manipulation. I uncovered backdoors in most security systems. At some point during those years, damning intel about a gang of fiends who tortured and homicided my sister landed in the DEA's lap. Rival gangs got wind that this gang had state evidence and were using it to negotiate deals. prompting them to act faster than the authorities. So the government saved a bundle on legal battles. Now, those on my tail are on the cartel's payroll, the same cartel I relieved of about $30 million. I really should have stopped at $28 million, but I stumbled upon another small account. I sensed something fishy about it, but I was young, foolish, and still seething. Once that money passed through 40 accounts in 6 countries, my anti-hacking system started sounding alarms. They planted a trace program on the account they targeted, where the breach originated. It'll take them some time. They had to sift through around 100 IP addresses before even reaching a chain of bypass servers. I plugged in the flash drive and executed a few commands. The trail leading to me was effectively severed, leaving them no access to data. The vacant building I called home went up in flames due to a homeless fire that spiraled out of control. The hard drives, memory cards, and all my personal documents went up in smoke in a desert fire. Convinced there was no salvaging any info from the ashes, I hopped in my van and headed west, arriving in Las Vegas 4 days later. "Sweetheart, I need your help. The computer's acting wonky again," I pleaded with my lovely wife, Linda. "Honestly, Mark, how can a 25-year-old guy be so clueless with computers?" she quipped, planting a quick kiss on my forehead. A few clicks and keystrokes later, I was back to checking emails. "Dinner's in half an hour." "Thanks, dear," I replied, watching her retreat to the kitchen. It's been 2 years since Linda and I tied the knot, and I still can't believe my luck. After leaving my old life behind, I reinvented myself, working as a trucker at a local lumber mill. With decent wages, thanks to our trade union affiliation, I carefully withdrew a couple $100,000 from one of my offshore accounts and bought a cozy 3-bedroom house on an acre of land. I built a discreet structure next to the house for storage and set up a hidden room to revamp my computer system. It looked like a regular concrete floor, but underneath, it housed stairs leading underground. I made the decision to lay off chasing down our dealers and cartels for a bit. I had enough cash tucked away in case of emergencies, and it seemed wise to vanish for a while and let things simmer down. However, I didn't want to lose my expertise, and I needed to stay current with new tech. The shop was for my hobby of restoring classic muscle cars. Since my wife had zero interest in that, she never stepped foot in my store. It also provided me with the solitude to go online and dabble a bit without her catching on. You might wonder why I keep this side of me hidden from her. Well, she knows me as a simple mechanic and truck driver with little computer knowledge. Obviously, when we first met and started dating, I couldn't just come clean about being a hacker known as Ghost in the cyber underground. Firstly, the feds were after me for several cyber crimes, eager to recruit me for their own purposes. Secondly, there were some dangerous criminal outfits running down for me. If they caught wind of me, things would have turned ugly fast. How would our relationship fare after that? Need you even ask? After we tied the knot, I had a few more precautions to take. It was for her safety. If she remained oblivious, they couldn't exploit her for information. No, it's better that she only knows the man she married. Let me tell you a bit about my wife. First and foremost, she's the most gorgeous woman in the world to me. I often hear in stories how each woman is deemed the most beautiful, and I wonder how that can be. I won't sugarcoat it. To you, she might just seem average in appearance, but to me, she's a goddess. It's all about differing perspectives and tastes. She stands at 5'6", with wavy, coppery bronze hair flowing down to her mid-back. Her emerald green eyes are captivating, and she's a size 34D, with a small waist, flat tummy, slightly wider hips, and an incredibly attractive posterior measuring 40 inches. Her legs are long, slender, toned, and sun-kissed. She boasts a slender nose, high cheekbones, dimples when she smiles, full kissable lips, and a modest chin that's not overly prominent. So, how did we meet? I was on duty at the sawmill one afternoon when she walked in. She needed a couple of boards for shelving in her new apartment. As we selected her order, she mentioned her lack of proficiency with tools. Seizing the opportunity, I offered to swing by after work to set up the shelves. My only request? She'd buy the beer, and I'd accept dinner as payment the next evening. From there, dinner transitioned into dancing. Sorry to disappoint, but there's no scandalous lovemaking tale here. Our date concluded with a simple, chaste kiss on the cheek. Truth be told, I was rather apprehensive around women. Allow me to explain. When I pilfered all that money from the cartel, I was a scrawny 19-year-old, weighing in at 110 pounds, a complete computer nerd. My romantic encounters up to that point were non-existent. Since relocating to Las Vegas, I've only had 3 encounters with courtesans. The first was underwhelming. She seemed robotic. The second, at a brothel in Pahrump, at least pretended to care. The third, also in Pahrump, was more instructional. I paid for the entire night, and had her truly teach me how to satisfy a woman. Now, I was in a relationship with a woman I genuinely admired. It wasn't until our 5th date that we finally had lovemaking. I treated her to dinner at the Stratosphere before hitting up a lively dance club on the Strip. After indulging in an expensive bottle of wine and a few drinks while dancing for a solid 2 hours, we headed back to my place. I used to think she was beautiful, but seeing her without clothes on, she was an absolute goddess. I didn't even need to ask. Her damp sheets confirmed everything was all right. As long as I made her happy, I was content. Apparently, the last courtesan I visited had taught me well. Additionally, I spent a whole year engaging in sports, which, combined with my work, increased my muscle mass and endurance. I now stood at 6 feet 1 inch tall. Despite considering myself a nerd, one thing I had never really considered was the size of my manhood. I just assumed I was average like everyone else. Of course, the courtesans raved about my size, but they had to, right? I didn't truly believe them when they praised my size. Linda and I dated for about 6 months before I popped the question, and 6 months later we tied the knot. We were happy together. Linda worked as an accountant for a large national company with an office in Las Vegas, pulling in a decent salary that, combined with mine, allowed us to live quite comfortably. I never needed to dip into my secret accounts. We dined at top-notch restaurants, caught shows, enjoyed rides on a nice pontoon boat on the lake, and both drove nice cars. Our bed life was pretty good, averaging about 4 times a week. Since we didn't have children yet, we made love all over the house, in the backyard, in the pool, in the hot tub. We relished the variety. Typically, after returning from work, I'd spend a couple of hours tinkering in my store before dinner. Half the time, I'd be working on one of my machines, while the other half, I'd be in the room playing on the computer. I wasn't doing anything explicitly wrong. I just hacked into places I shouldn't have been. I never actually stole anything or tampered with systems. I simply honed my skills. Sure, I could have pilfered loads of data and money, but I didn't want to leave any traces. After dinner, we'd cuddle up on the couch and watch a movie before turning in for the night. Sometimes our bedtime routine included a couple of hours of lovemaking before drifting off. I continued to exhibit my complete technological ineptitude. After all, who would suspect that someone who struggles to check their email is one of the world's most wanted hackers? Throughout all this time, I was hacking into the computer systems of banks, governments, and major corporations. I also reconfigured the legion of personal computer bots I once possessed. I concealed my whereabouts by launching my hacks from foreign servers, sometimes multiple servers simultaneously. About 6 months ago, I noticed Linda becoming a bit more tense. It didn't seem like a major issue at the time, though. Our frequency of lovemaking dropped from about 4 times a week to 2. She began working longer hours and seemed exhausted when she came home. Most nights, she'd head straight to the shower, eat dinner, then hit the hay. When I inquired, she mentioned something about a hefty bill they were trying to settle. It sounded plausible enough. Occasionally, she'd ring me up from her office on a Friday, letting me know she'd be hitting happy hour with some coworkers post-work. She'd done this enough times for me not to fret. After about 6 months, I inquired about the duration of these outings, figuring they'd either settle the bill or misplace it by then. Linda mentioned it'd likely be another week or 2 before things settled down again. Feeling she deserved some TLC after her hard work, I surprised her with a full day spa package for that Saturday. She was over the moon when I presented it to her on Wednesday night. After expressing her gratitude, we found ourselves in bed, enjoying each other immensely. Saturday rolled around and she departed for her spa day at 9 a.m. With a quick kiss goodbye, she headed out, not returning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I grabbed my coffee and headed to the shop to wrap up the engine I had on the bench. After about an hour's work, I took a break and made my way to the computer room. Up to that point, I intentionally refrained from hacking into Linda's company's systems. It was a principle I staunchly upheld, kind of like not fouling your own nest. I was resolute about this. I never meddled with the company I worked for, nor would I with the one she worked for. After logging in and checking my security programs, I started to ponder the nature of this significant account. Perhaps it was worth investigating further, maybe even accessing their servers to see what they held. Their security was laughably easy to bypass. I was in within minutes. My first destination, Linda's computer. Since she was working on the project, I figured I could glean some insights from there. Odd. There was nothing particularly noteworthy about the new major clients. I ran a few searches using keywords like offer, new client quote, and related terms, but found nothing. I then delved into her folders. That's when I stumbled upon a locked folder labeled Photos for James. Why did Linda have a folder of photos for that little weasel? Yes, I knew who James was. I'd met him several times at corporate events I attended with Linda. Despite her belief that he was quite adept with computers, I didn't particularly care for him. It took mere seconds to unlock the folder. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. Inside were dozens of photographs without clothes of Linda in her office, some depicting her engaged in carnal acts with another man in various positions. What struck me the hardest was the inclusion of photos of carnal activities she had consistently denied me. I sat there, staring blankly at the images. In that moment, a part of me felt like it died. Eventually, I snapped out of it and began to contemplate confronting her as soon as she returned home. Divorcing this deceitful woman was inevitable. I still had a few hours before her return, so I pressed on with my search for more clues. I suspected this all began about 6 months ago, when I first noticed a change in her behavior. Upon delving into her email, I was met with an even greater shock. Several email exchanges revealed that her affair with this other person was far more long-term than I had initially thought. Apparently, they had been involved for about a year before she even met me. If that's the case, why did she start a relationship with me in the first place? What's really going on here? Another email mentioned accounting discrepancies with some major clients, as well as their own company, along with something about an offshore account. I switched over to James's computer. There, too, were photographs of Linda, some depicting her in what seemed to be a motel room and in another man's bedroom. Realizing I needed more time for this, I decided to make copies of both his and Linda's computers, as well as their folders on the company network, onto a spare drive on my server. Out of habit, I checked the personnel folder on the server and paused when I noticed my name on one of the folders. Before disconnecting from the network, I discreetly installed spyware on both computers and the server, ensuring that all their activities would be redirected to my system. Needless to say, work on my cars took a back seat for a while. When Linda returned from her spa day, she expressed her gratitude with a night of passionate lovemaking. Yes, I was disgusted by her actions, but I'm only human. I couldn't pass up the opportunity for incredible closeness with such a beautiful, enthusiastic, and energetic woman. She could be the devil incarnate, and I'd still seize the chance. In my eyes, she was exactly that. Come Sunday, I returned to my shop. Linda was still asleep, so I took the opportunity to access her phone and install spyware on it. This way, text messages would be discreetly copied to my computer system, and all phone calls would be monitored and digitally recorded on a separate hard drive. I'd also be able to track her online activities. Linda left around 10 a.m., mentioning she was meeting a friend for a shopping trip. Since she had disabled the Find My Friends app on her phone, I resorted to hacking into her car's internal GPS to track her movements. Surprisingly, she indeed went to the mall. Once I confirmed she wouldn't be back soon, I seized the opportunity to take her laptop. My first task was to duplicate all its contents onto another hard drive. Subsequently, I installed a keylogger program and configured the camera for remote access. Aware that I didn't have much time before returning the laptop to its original place, I quickly skimmed through her browser history. It was then that I stumbled upon a second email address. I also noticed multiple visits to a bank in the Cayman Islands. That would require further investigation later. I wiped off some grease and oil from my hands and face to create the illusion of having worked on the car when I heard Linda return home. Then it was the usual routine: shower, dinner, a movie, and off to bed. For a week, I meticulously upheld the facade of an oblivious, caring husband. Each evening, I'd head to the shop, ostensibly to tinker with one of my cars for a couple of hours. In reality, I was sifting through heaps of data I had gathered. Then, on a Tuesday evening, I stumbled upon an exchange between Linda and James that piqued my interest. James cautioned her about deleting the browsing history on my laptop after using it. Why did she need my laptop? Sure, I had configured my laptop to connect to servers right after purchasing it, but the notion of spying on myself had never crossed my mind. The following evening, while reviewing the day's updates from their work computers, I noticed another data stream incoming. Instantly recognizing it as from my personal laptop, I prioritized it over everything else. As I delved into this new stream, it became evident that money transfers were occurring. I activated the laptop camera and redirected the feed to another screen. Linda was working on my computer, Bluetooth earpiece in place. The microphone captured her voice during a phone call. Using a third screen, I initiated a live feed of her conversation. I watched and listened as Linda, under James's guidance, transferred around $50,000 from a fabricated account at their company to a bank in the Cayman Islands. And all this was orchestrated through my computer. After completing the task, she wiped the day's history and logged out. What's really happening here? I hadn't yet had a chance to inspect my personnel file from their HR folder. To compound matters, I discovered I had been appointed as a computer security consultant, unbeknownst to me, of course. James, as the head of their IT department, apparently made the hiring decisions. Furthermore, I found several payments for my services all funneled into the Cayman Islands account. It was clear. I was unwittingly roped into a scheme where Linda and James utilized my computer and IP address to transfer large sums of money from a fictitious account at their company to an offshore bank. Additionally, I learned of Linda and James's affair. Even before meeting Linda, I could sense I was being drawn into something sinister. It was time for a change of strategy. Now fully aware of the situation, I needed to assess the extent of the problem and devise a plan of action. It was dire. Upon scrutinizing the Cayman Islands account, I discovered nearly $10 million stashed away. Reviewing the transactions, I noticed they commenced about 6 months after Linda and I tied the knot. They had also attempted to obfuscate the computer used to execute the money theft. Adding to the complexity, a deeper dive into my personal file unearthed several alarming red flags. When the situation inevitably hit the fan, I was squarely in the crosshairs. So, what's my move now? Surprisingly, it wasn't too difficult to play it cool around this woman. Did she want to be engaged in physical relationship? I indulged her. As things progressed, I found myself enjoying both of them. What can I say? She's attractive. Yes, I seized every opportunity for closeness with her. The following Saturday, I delved into her emails from the beginning of our acquaintance. That's when I discovered they had singled me out as their scapegoat from the start. While she found me appealing and believed being engaged in physical relationship with me wouldn't be a hassle, she harbored concerns about my evident lack of computer skills. James, on the other hand, saw it as an advantage. The less I knew about computers, the less likely I was to uncover their scheme. Now it was time for a retaliatory plan. I began orchestrating everything. First, I opened a couple of new bank accounts. Then, I activated the bot army I had assembled. Most of these bots would serve as a distraction, but I had a small group that could be traced back. It would pose a challenge, requiring a skilled hacker to trace it to its source. I didn't want it to be too straightforward. Naturally, I deleted the personnel folder containing my name from Linda's company servers. Additionally, I hacked and altered all file transfers conducted on my laptop to display a different IP address. To prevent a recurrence, I unleashed a potent virus on my laptop and disconnected it from my clandestine servers. Later that evening, when I checked my email, I discovered that a virus had ravaged my laptop from the spam I had opened, virtually rendering it useless. I wasn't surprised to see concern etched on Linda's face when she saw the damage. The next morning, I stumbled upon a conversation between Linda and James. Apparently, they were nearing the end of their scheme. They just needed 2 more transfers to secure another $10 million before springing the trap on me. The plan was to suddenly uncover the theft. Naturally, since Linda would be the one to make the discovery, she would spearhead the investigation. Meanwhile, James, as the IT manager, would oversee the cyber aspect. No wonder all evidence pointed directly at me. Linda, of course, would file for divorce while I languished in jail. Then, in about a year, she'd marry James. Sure, there might be some suspicion regarding Linda's possible involvement, but she would deflect by citing her investigation and her belief that I had been concealing my computer knowledge from her. Moreover, it would appear evident that she was a sufferer, as I had specifically targeted her and exploited her to gain access to the company's computer systems. They chuckled at the idea of me fielding questions about the missing money when I was clueless about what the police were talking about. Linda offered to purchase me a replacement laptop, suggesting they could finalize the last transfers within the next 3 weeks. Now, I had a clear deadline. Come Monday, I informed my boss that I needed a week off for personal matters, which wasn't an issue given my surplus of free time. I scoured the internet to locate the toughest, most ruthless divorce attorney in town and scheduled an appointment for the following day. While they believed they had a 3-week window, they'd be fortunate to make it to 2. Upon returning home, I powered up the computer and got down to business. I accessed James's home computer for an IT expert. You'd think he'd be savvy enough to power it down when not in use, but no such luck. He merely turned off the monitor. I routed his computer through a server in Belarus, though ultimately, the connection would be obliterated. His computer would be a dead end for anyone attempting to trace it. The cartel I infiltrated 5 years ago had at least taught me a thing or two about security. Despite changing their accounts and passwords, they still utilize the same banks. Updated passwords are only effective if you don't store them on personal computers, which are vulnerable to phishing attacks embedded in email links promising products any multimillionaire would desire. This was just the preliminary phase. I'd deal with James after I finished with Linda. James wouldn't survive this, and I still needed him to bring Linda down. As per my routine, I headed to my shop to tinker with my car. Meanwhile, she dashed off to Walmart to procure a new laptop for me. During her absence, I laid the groundwork for the scheme. It was crucial for her to be present at home when using the computer. If she could prove she wasn't home, she'd have an alibi. I couldn't allow that. Upon her return, she messaged me that she'd purchased the laptop and estimated it would take about an hour to set it up for me. I expressed my gratitude and got to work. Initially, he severed all connections with James. Despite my disdain for her, I still didn't want her to suffer. James would likely face torture and end of life, while Linda might only end up in prison for decades, who knows. I established a separate server route to Linda's laptop, providing a direct link to her work computer and then to the company servers. $20 million was funneled from the company into 4 accounts under her name. Travel arrangements were finalized, securing a one-way ticket for her to the Cayman Islands on Thursday morning. Before she left her computer, I purged James from her contacts, deleted all emails with him, and wiped the account's history clean. Subsequently, I removed all my spyware, taking a calculated risk that she wouldn't have enough time to react. Too bad. Next, I terminated and erased the connection with her laptop. After completing these tasks, I remotely disabled the wireless router in the house. I possessed a separate superior router in the store, unbeknownst to her. A message surfaced from the spyware I planted on her phone. Apparently, she had finished setting up the laptop for me when the internet suddenly vanished, just as she was about to execute another transfer on my computer. I couldn't help but laugh as they grappled with the issue. While they were preoccupied, I swiftly transferred all the stolen money into new accounts under Linda's name. Once the account was depleted, I promptly closed it. Lastly, I removed the spyware from Linda's phone to prevent any unwanted attention. Satisfied with my actions, I headed out for dinner. Tomorrow promised to be an eventful day, to say the least. Linda appeared visibly anxious, to put it mildly. Upon my arrival, she informed me that my new computer was set up and ready, but the internet was down, preventing me from logging in or checking my email. Little did she know, this posed minimal inconvenience for me. Throughout the evening, she remained preoccupied, engrossed in her phone during the entire movie. I sensed her growing disappointment, suspecting her attempts to access the account had failed. She also seemed to be messaging someone. As I retired to bed, a smile crept onto my face. There would be no closeness that night. The following morning, I left the house before Linda departed for work, biding my time until my appointment with the lawyer. I couldn't help but wonder how Linda's day would unfold. Soon enough, I would have all the answers. Finally, I was ushered into my lawyer's office. You know those TV dramas where a dashing lawyer, impeccably dressed in a suit that's both professional and seductive, strides into the courtroom and effortlessly outmaneuvers the opposition? That was my lawyer. Standing at 5'6", with an angelic face, curves that could make a race car swerve, legs that seemed to stretch for miles, and a chest that could incite a war. Within 2 minutes of the hearing, it was clear she was going to be a formidable force in the courtroom. You could practically hear your heart harmonizing with the choir in the room. After ensuring confidentiality, I confided in her about my wife's infidelity throughout our entire relationship. Then, I detailed the embezzlement and the setup. When she asked how I knew all this, I gave a partial explanation. Well, let's be honest, I spun quite a tale. I claimed I was using my wife's laptop because mine was malfunctioning. And that's when I stumbled upon a folder filled with explicit photos and discovered her incriminating emails to her lover. Those emails laid bare her betrayal and their illicit dealings. I just wanted out of this marriage before the proverbial hit the fan. She agreed to handle the case and begin preparing the necessary documents. She mentioned she could serve her by week's end. However, I urged her to hold off for a moment. I had a sudden stroke of inspiration and didn't want to tip my hand too soon. With that, we wrapped up the meeting and I returned home, fired up my system, reactivated my home Wi-Fi, and got down to business. I left spyware operational on Linda's work computer. Apparently, things went haywire pretty quickly. Bright and early the next morning, an emergency meeting convened. The $20 million theft was uncovered, sparking an immediate investigation. Meanwhile, I managed to hack into James's phone. James traced the theft back to Linda and discovered their account had been drained. and the funds transferred to new ones totaling $20 million. Accusations flew, but no plausible explanations emerged. Suddenly, Linda received an email summoning her to a meeting with the CEO, CFO, and head of security. This was bound to be interesting. The sound of several cars pulling into my driveway interrupted my leisure. I secured the premises, heading to the main store and ensuring the secret door was locked. No need for anyone to poke around in there. To keep up appearances, I slicked some lube on myself to mimic working on my car. Exiting the store, I spotted police cars and large Chevrolet Suburbans. The officers wore standard uniforms, but those emerging from the SUVs sported windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on them. Curious. I barely glanced at the warrants before ushering them into the house, offering full cooperation since I had nothing to hide. Playing guide, I pointed out my wife's computer and mentioned mine, which had barely been touched since we got it yesterday, with the Wi-Fi down last night. "Take what you need," I said. "I'm not really savvy with computers." My story held up during several hours of harsh questioning at the police station. After all, I was just a truck driver with minimal computer knowledge. I professed ignorance about my wife's work as an accountant, insisting I didn't know her clients. A one-way ticket out of the country, only she would know about that. Poor James, forced to testify against her, must have felt deeply betrayed upon discovering she had siphoned off the money into her own accounts, leaving him with nothing. They soon realized I was clueless about the situation. Despite a thorough search of my store, they failed to uncover the entrance to the computer room. Eventually, they sent me home. Linda was arrested while I was being interrogated. James, witnessing the discovery of the money, must have been gutted to learn she had cut off his access, transferred the funds, and skipped town, leaving him high and dry. Thankfully, I anticipated the impending interrogation since, after all, I'm her husband. It's logical to assume I'd be implicated in this. Naturally, she reached out to me as her only call, so I promptly secured a lawyer for her. I extensively researched local defense attorneys to ensure I didn't inadvertently hire a competent one. Instead, I deliberately chose a subpar lawyer, aiming for her conviction and full sentence. What's intriguing is the federal nature of this case. There's no parole or early release. If sentenced to 20 years, it's 20 years served. I attended her bail hearing, using our house as collateral to secure her release. Due to flight risk, she wore an ankle monitor. Despite my disdain, I maintained the facade of a caring husband. Fortunately, her distress spared me any marital duties. Her phone, seized as evidence, was swiftly replaced by me, complete with my spyware. Oddly, James blocked her. When she reached out, he declined contact, aware he'd testify against her. Stubbornly, she rejected a plea deal, adamant someone framed her. She truly believed she'd triumph. Admittedly, she did take half the money, but not all. Nor did she use that account, her own computer, buy a ticket, or fire her partner. The money was returned without issue. The trial amused me. Watching James testify against his lover using computer records revealed his inner conflict. He believed she planned to flee, leaving him behind. Linda felt betrayed by her supposed soulmate, leading to her imprisonment. I felt triumphant during the 3 days of his testimony, witnessing her transition from love to resentment. Despite her efforts on the stand, the overwhelming evidence left her unable to provide a credible defense. She now faces a 20-year sentence in federal prison. With the trial concluded, it was time to deal with James. I had a devious plan for him, though he'd never know it was me behind his downfall. Such a scheme would be satisfying. I instructed my lawyer to update the divorce papers to reflect Linda's conviction and lengthy incarceration. Within days, she was served. Setting up new accounts in Geneva and the Cayman Islands tied to James, I subtly left traces on the dark web, all pointing to his IP address. The ghost of my past exploits resurfaced after 5 years, sparking chatter among hackers. Now, the challenge was to leave a trace convincing enough to implicate an experienced hacker, yet subtle enough to cast doubt on my involvement. I navigated through 10 servers spread across 6 different countries. Eventually, I deployed a legion of bots and initiated an assault on the initial bank. After gaining access, I located the 2 target accounts and moved them to James's newly created accounts. With that task completed, I halted the bank attack, severed my connection to James's computer, and monitored the dark web for any responses. While I didn't anticipate immediate repercussions, caution was paramount. The following morning, another bank fell sufferer to an attack, resulting in the depletion of 4 additional accounts. Now, $20 million resided in the account I had established for James, prompting a search for me. Though they would not uncover me, the digital trail would eventually lead to the Phantom. Various dark web hacker forums ignited with activity, indicating a group tracking the trail, likely the same one from 5 years prior. It was time to conclude this. Returning to the bank, I bypassed James's computer and transferred $20 million to another account in Switzerland, ensuring no trace of the transaction remained. I had no concerns about the cartel reclaiming that money. After reaccessing James's computer, I launched a targeted attack on a bank account containing a tracker. This time, the sum was inconsequential. Only $2 million mattered, solely for the tracker it carried. Last time I fled because I was aware of the thefts and understood how the beacon operated. If I hadn't been informed about the money transfers or the accounts I possessed, and if I hadn't been aware of the tracker linked to that final account, I would have been apprehended. I'm curious to see how James will attempt to justify all this to them. It'd be interesting to watch them grill him about the money when he's clueless about what money they're referring to. Now it's time to sever connections with his computer and eliminate all traces of my involvement. This occurred a week later. I cleared out my computer room and repurposed it as a storage area. While I was wrapping up paperwork for a property I had bought in Montana through an anonymous C corporation, a news report aired about a missing person. James hadn't reported to work for a couple of days, and his whereabouts were unknown. His vehicle was discovered abandoned in a shopping center parking lot, yet he remained elusive. I pondered where he could have gone, but I had to return to packing. "No!" I shouted as they used the cattle prod on me once more, trying to extract information. "I swear I don't know what you're talking about." "Crap, Mr. Ghost," they retorted. "This time you slipped up. The tracking software led us directly to your computer. We found all the data on it. We recovered $2 million from the recent hack, but we want to know where the remaining $20 million is, along with the $30 million from 5 years ago. Give us this information, and we'll end your suffering swiftly. Keep lying, and it'll only get worse." However, I'm clueless. They seized me as I was about to enter my car at the mall. I felt a sharp prick in my neck from a needle. Then, darkness enveloped me. Several hours later, I regained consciousness aboard a private jet, securely fastened to my seat. That's when the interrogation commenced. I had no clue what they were referring to. They repeatedly referred to me as Ghost and inquired about the money they claimed I had stolen a few days prior. Allegedly, $20 million had vanished, along with another $30 million 5 years ago. My protestations of ignorance fell on deaf ears. When confronted with incontrovertible evidence on my personal computer, I was utterly shocked. I could provide them with the information they sought and meet a swift demise. Alternatively, they would extend my remaining, albeit brief, lifespan into unrelenting torment. I sealed my fate when I realized I had no responses to offer them at present. Suspended undressed from the ceiling of a bunker buried deep within the jungles of Colombia, I endured unspeakable torment. My legs were forcibly spread apart, granting them access to my genitals with the aid of cattle prods. It's been 3 agonizing days. On the initial day, I endured beatings for my silence. The following day brought the lash of a whip. Today, it's the agonizing jolt of cattle prods against sensitive areas. I truly wish I could provide them with answers. I dread what tomorrow, the day after, and the following days might bring. James departed over a month ago. His mutilated body was discovered on a Colombian roadside yesterday. Mark will vanish by day's end. After one final stop, I'll embrace my new identity. I've already dispatched all my belongings to a Denver storage facility, funded anonymously via bank transfer. Linda was escorted in and shackled to the table across from me. She appeared worse for wear. Orange certainly wasn't her color. No makeup, hair slightly unkempt, bags under her eyes. It seemed prison hadn't agreed with her yet. "How are you holding up?" I inquired. "Please, Mark, you've got to help me. I'm innocent," she pleaded. "Linda," I sighed, "there's nothing I can do for you. Besides, we're getting divorced." "Please, Mark, I didn't do it and I don't want a divorce." "Just sign the papers, Linda. It's over," I insisted. "Please, Mark, talk to James. He can help me. We were friends once. Please reach out to him," she implored. "Have you heard from James?" I asked. "No, I kept hoping he'd visit, but he never showed," she replied. "Well, he'll never come now. He was eliminated in Colombia." Her face drained of color in shock. "No, he couldn't have," she protested. "Perhaps he didn't know, but they believed he did. Now, Linda, it's best you sign the divorce papers and move on." "But you're leaving me with nothing," she cried. "You won't need anything here. You'll be here for the next 20 years. Please, Mark, you've got to help me. I can't endure staying here. I need to escape, Linda pleaded. Please, it's time for me to share a story with you, Linda. Maybe this will shed some light, I replied. About 5 years back, there was a skilled hacker known as the Ghost. He earned this moniker for his expertise in covering his digital tracks. Like an elusive specter infiltrating computer systems, the Ghost embarked on a personal mission to target cartels. Over 30 million was pilfered from one cartel before they enlisted other hackers to hunt down this elusive phantom. Sensing the trackers closing in, the Ghost vanished, leaving no trace behind, and forged a new identity. He ceased all digital activities, except for occasional minor hacks for practice. To those around him, he appeared technologically inept, even to his wife. Yes, he fell in love and married. He cherished his wife deeply. But after 3 years of marriage, he stumbled upon a shocking truth. His wife was unfaithful, maintaining a relationship with her real boyfriend throughout their marriage. To compound matters, he discovered that his wife had married him solely to implicate him in the embezzlement scheme she and her boyfriend were orchestrating. Her eyes widened, and her complexion paled when I recounted their scheme to her. Determined not to let it unfold, the Ghost devised a plan for retribution. He hacked into their devices and work network to gather evidence, shifting the blame away from himself and directly onto his wife. He also ensured her boyfriend would believe she was cheating on him. The ultimate blow for his wife was orchestrating her lover's testimony against her, resulting in her lengthy imprisonment, shattering their hearts as they felt betrayed, much like the phantom felt by his wife, I explained. You, she exhaled, processing the revelation. Continue. With his wife taken care of, it was time to pursue her lover. Since the cartel was still hunting the phantom, why not exact revenge and make them believe they finally captured their target? So, Ghost utilized his wife's lover's computer to pilfer a large sum from the cartel. Unfortunately, Ghost made a small error, leaving a trace back to the boyfriend. Consequently, the cartel traced the hack, leading to the boyfriend. Authorities suspect he endured torture for over a month before succumbing. Regrettably, he lacked the information the cartel sought. None of this is real or substantiated, but I thought this fictional account might help you cope. While I believe you are not entirely guilty as the evidence suggests, you're far from innocent. Just sign the papers. Imagine the repercussions if someone discovers evidence portraying you as an informant. Her face flushed with rage. You damn fool! She yelled, lunging towards me. The guards promptly restrained her, securing her to the table with short chains, preventing her from reaching me. As they escorted her away, shrieking, I exited, heading to a cheap, disposable car parked at the mall. Leaving Mark behind, I walked to my true vehicle awaiting me, ready to drive away with my new identity.
My husband caught me cheating in a hotel room and served me divorce papers while I was with my affair partner. We eagerly waited for passengers at the airport's baggage area. My brother-in-law Bob, along with his 2 daughters, 9-year-old Dana and 7-year-old Louise, joined my son David, 12, and my daughter Sheila, 9. The kids proudly held up a big sign that read, "Welcome home, mommies." 2 weeks ago, my wife Mandy and her sister Helen took a vacation to the beaches of Bice, a perfect escape from the chilly Minnesota winters, especially in January. Finally, the passengers from the plane started emerging at the door, and the kids couldn't contain their excitement, bursting into cheers at the sight of their mothers. Both women looked stunning with their beautiful tans and smiles. Mandy warmly greeted David and Sheila, giving them tight hugs and kisses. Then she turned to me, rewarding me with a passionate kiss. I embraced her and didn't want to let go. "I really missed you, honey." "Just wait until the evening," she whispered in my ear. "I'll show you how much I missed you." That night, she certainly lived up to her promise. After 15 years of marriage, she knows me well, especially my appreciation for tan lines. After putting the kids to bed, we headed straight to the bedroom. "Honey, get into bed and be ready for me when I come out of the bathroom." In no time, I found myself waiting in bed. A few minutes later, Mandy emerged from the bathroom wearing a bikini. Mandy's most attractive feature has always been her beautiful face, perfect for smiles. However, she's her own harshest critic, feeling she's too short or too thin. "Both pregnancies had the side effect of making my chest larger and fuller," she joked once. The thong bikini beautifully highlighted her curves, but the best was yet to come. Mandy stood at the foot of the bed, showcasing her golden tan from the beach. Slowly, she pulled down her thong, revealing faint tan lines where the straps were. The private area remained the same milky white as before. Excitement surged as she unbuttoned her bikini top, letting it hang over her chest. Finally, the bikini fell to the floor, revealing her cute little chest. I immediately crawled to the foot of the bed, grabbing her waist and pulling her towards me, showering her with kisses and caresses. She responded eagerly, reaching her peak in just a few minutes, several times. I simply enjoyed the musky scent of her body. She expressed how much she had missed me and shared that she found it sweet. She mentioned her gladness at being back home. We spent a good part of the night reconnecting. A few days later, during Mandy's bathtub cleaning, she playfully mentioned having been in the hallway enjoying the beautiful view. She giggled and approached me teasingly, pressing her body against mine. She explained that this was her way of teasing. Normally, I would press my hips down to increase contact, but a few seconds earlier, a feeling of fear overcame me. I didn't know why, but something was definitely wrong with the picture in front of me. However, I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Tired of my lack of response to her teasing, Mandy expressed dissatisfaction, mentioning that, like all men, I only used words and no actions. She made a final thrust of her hips, and then turned to grab the gloves from the sink, stating that she better finish the bath. It was then that I realized a small detail had struck my subconscious. I turned pale, left, and muttered that I was going to the garage, not caring if Mandy heard me. In the garage, I sat on a workbench, lost in my thoughts, having a bad feeling about what I had just discovered. I wondered if Mandy had cheated on me while she was in Bice. I was sure of one thing: if Mandy tried even a little, finding a willing man wouldn't be a problem for her. And what I saw made sense only if she tried something with her sister while on vacation. What will I do if I find out she cheated on me? The answer was clear. I'll leave her without a second thought, even though it will hurt, especially for our 2 children. Why did she do this to me? To us? Am I such a bad husband? These questions circled in my head for the rest of the evening. Despite strongly feeling she cheated, I had no evidence. How can I be sure? The deception, if it happened, occurred 3,000 miles away in another country. I can't confront her, she'll deny it. Can I stand up to her sister? I played with this idea, but the 2 sisters were equally stubborn. Throughout my life, I knew sisters. If one cheated, the other did too. I had to talk to Bob about my suspicions. Later on, I heard Mandy calling me and I returned home. What kept you in the garage for over 2 hours? Mandy inquired. Just doing a bit of cleaning, I replied casually. Then a thought struck me. I didn't want to share a bed with her anyway. I've caught a cold that hit me this morning. I think I'll sleep on the couch for a few days. Mandy didn't seem pleased. All right, I'll make you some herbal tea before bed. Chamomile should help, she suggested. After Mandy went to bed, I found myself alone with my thoughts, jumping from one idea to another. Why did she do this? What should I do? Should I talk to Bob to find out if Helen cheated? At some point, I realized there was a foolproof way to find out if Mandy was cheating. She had developed a habit of staying in touch with all her friends and acquaintances. Mandy had around 600 or 700 friends on Facebook, and even more in her Yahoo address book. If she contacted someone in Bice, I'm sure they exchanged information via email to stay in touch. However, I wasn't sure if she would use her current email account since we knew each other's passwords. I fell asleep, and a plan began to form. The next day, exhausted and struggling to concentrate at work, I scheduled an appointment with a divorce lawyer on Friday. Then I called Bob, asking him to meet me for lunch. Surprised, he agreed, and I shared my discovery. Initially, he laughed, but I soon convinced him it was serious. He would investigate if Helen cheated on him. Pretending a bad flu, I left the office early and returned home at 3 p.m. I promptly installed keyboard tracking software on our home computer. It took a week before I discovered the truth. Mandy logged into another email account as BeachDreams1975, using our children's names and ages as the password. Just days after returning from Bice, she was in daily contact with Brad. The emails were explicit for both Mandy and Helen. Helen was involved with a guy named Steve. I forwarded all the emails and erased any traces of my surveillance. Then I sent Bob the emails from my account. I learned they had been intimate almost from the first day in Bice, and even planned to meet again in Chicago next month. The girls would pretend to shop while the 2 friends would pretend to watch the Chicago Blackhawks. A quick check of Mandy and Helen's Facebook pages revealed recent friends, Brad Simmons and Steve Reiner, both from Illinois and both married. I had them in my hands. I had a challenging task ahead. Bob denied that Helen and Mandy were cheating, keeping my suspicions a secret. He never truly believed his wife would cheat on him, a sentiment I understood. Despite Mandy's loving behavior toward me and the children, it was hard to believe she would end the marriage. She seemed so caring and loving that I sometimes doubted myself. It helped needing to resume regular closeness. I called Bob at work. I greeted him as Jack and asked if he could log into his personal email account from work. He confirmed and inquired if I had sent him something. I told him to read all the letters and call me back. After waiting for half an hour, Bob exclaimed over the phone, expressing his shock and anger. I calmed him down, assuring him that I had a plan and needed his help. We couldn't let them know what we knew, and I shared my desire to hurt Mandy. Bob agreed to the plan and revealed his eagerness for revenge. I instructed him to call home, leave a message saying he would be working late, and meet me in a pub in the old town that evening. At our first strategy meeting, I suggested to Bob that embarrassment could be a powerful tool against our wives. Bob, initially silent, eventually agreed. I mentioned that Tom, our father-in-law, was particularly fond of his 2 daughters, and Bob nodded in agreement. I revealed that Tom had a strong aversion to cheating wives, explaining that his ex-wife, the mother of Mandy and Helen, had cheated on him throughout their marriage. Bob, with a sly smile, added that Tom hated cheating wives more than anything else. We decided to use this information to embarrass Mandy and Helen in front of their loved ones. I outlined my plan, explaining that we had only 2 weeks to act like caring husbands and advised Bob to follow my lead. I suggested he pretend to catch a cold, work late into the night, and be too sick or tired for bedroom activities, keeping closeness to once a week for appearances. That evening, I returned very late, pretending to have a terrible headache. Despite thinking about the revenge plan for a while, I soon fell asleep, aware of the impending betrayal. When Mandy mentioned a shopping trip to Chicago with Helen, I enthusiastically supported the idea. To show love and support, I even booked a hotel room using our joint credit card, reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Johnston. Double occupancy, assuming Helen and Mandy would share. Bob offered to pay for the room, which was reserved for Mr. and Mr. Rowe, also double occupancy. Both Bob and I arranged everything so that each woman thought we were renting one room, unaware that their lovers would be there. The girls planned to take Friday off, fly to Chicago in the morning, and return on a late flight from Chicago on Sunday. The following week, I spoke with Tom Raines, Mandy's father, sharing my plan for a surprise family reunion in Chicago with the kids, since it was just 2 weeks after our 15th wedding anniversary. Tom thought it was a great idea. I asked Tom to book 3 rooms, thinking it would be a big surprise. Bob and I were outraged by our wives' behavior. On the morning we dropped them off at the airport, they acted like giddy schoolgirls on their way to their first date, laughing at nothing and everything, filled with nervous energy. At the security gate, we kissed them on the cheek, and they didn't notice that neither Bob nor I said, "I love you." Bob drove us back to town, and I quickly called the private detective I hired. I inquired if everything was in place for their stay in Chicago. The next morning, we all met at the airport. During the flight, Tom switched seats with my son David and sat next to me. Sensing something amiss, he asked what the problem was, noting that Bob and I looked like we were heading to a funeral. I apologized for keeping him in the dark and revealed the bad news about our wives cheating on him. I explained that a private investigator was collecting evidence for a divorce and we would file it as soon as we caught them with their lovers. Tom expressed sorrow, putting his hand on my shoulder in a fatherly way. He mentioned how much it hurt and wished the few years they lived with him were enough to guide them. Tom began to cry, saying he didn't know he could suffer so much again. Having come to his senses, he stood up and returned to his place. Alan White greeted us at the Chicago airport and handed 2 envelopes, one for Bob and one for me. Inside were incriminating photos and a DVD of the previous night's events. He informed us that the process server would contact us soon, and his operative was monitoring the bedrooms. His assistant would notify us of the most compromising moment to confront the lovers. Simmons and Reiner's wives would receive similar packages by midday. We asked Tom and Alan to look after the children for a while as we needed to assess the situation. My heart sank seeing Mandy in various explicit positions, including a troubling photo with 2 men. It seemed they had unprotected closeness, so Bob and I would need to get tested for STDs in Minneapolis. Alan called his assistant to check if the hotel was clear, as the lovers were out for lunch. Tom ordered 3 numbers, and we requested an additional key card for rooms 2011 and 2003, registered in our names. Both key cards were issued after the clerk checked our IDs. We informed the receptionist that our children had planned a surprise to avoid alerting our wives. We all went up to the 3rd floor, where our rooms were located. After an hour of waiting, Alan called, reporting that the lovers had returned from lunch and switched partners. Mandy was with Reiner, and Helen was with Simmons. Alan informed me that he was in the lobby, and the process server had just shown up. I turned off the phone and cheerfully told the children that it was time to go. "Remember what I told you, Sheila, and you too, David. Grandpa and I will enter the room first, and when I give you the signal, you shout, 'Surprise, Mom,' understood?" "No problem, Dad," said David. "And under no circumstances do you enter the room until I tell you to." "Yes, that's right. We understand everything, Dad. Go." We walked up the stairs and stopped in front of room 2011. I inserted the key and quietly opened the door. Tom and I went inside, the two children behind us. However, they didn't wait. As soon as the door opened, they shouted, "Surprise, Mom! We are here!" Caught off guard, Mandy had been with Reiner. Our appearance was indeed a surprise. Reiner hurriedly dressed and left the room. At least he reacted quickly. Mandy jumped out of bed, trying to gather herself. No, this can't be true. No, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed. "Hey, Mommy's undressed," squeaked Sheila, squeezing herself between Tom and me. I snapped my fingers, and the process server entered the room. "Mandy Johnston?" he asked the only undressed woman. "This is my mother," Sheila said, trying to be helpful. The process server handed her an envelope. "You've been served," he said, and took a photo of Mandy holding the envelope, attempting to hide her chest. He left. I urged the children to leave their mother while she got dressed. We exited the room, leaving Mandy crying on the floor, fully aware of the contents of the envelope. Bob and his children were in the hallway. I informed Bob that the situation with Helen had not gone well. Simmons had proven to be an aggressive type when interrupted during his indiscretions. He reacted angrily, and Tom got punched in the face. Without hesitation, Bob expressed his disappointment, punching Simmons immediately. Helen, in a commendable act, defended her father by scratching Simmons's face. I entered the room, removed Simmons, and tossed him into the bathroom, away from the kids' view, along with his clothes. "Get dressed and get out of here, goat," I ordered. Tom, Bob, and the children left the room without any shame. Helen, covered only with a blanket, followed them. Her father instructed her sternly, "Go back to the room and get dressed." She complied like a little girl walking back into the bedroom. The process server, who had fled during the argument, reappeared in the doorway. "Helen DeRoche?" "Yes," she responded. He handed her the envelope. "You've been served." We all returned upstairs. The initial plan was to spend the night and talk to our wives one last time, but I wasn't in the mood to be in the same room with Mandy. I grabbed our luggage and informed the kids that we were going home. Tom expressed his desire to stay. He had a lot to tell his daughters. Bob and his children returned with us to Minneapolis. 4 months later, despite Mandy's numerous pleas for forgiveness, a judge reviewed our case and granted an uncontested divorce. The house was mine because I inherited it from my parents before I met Mandy. I also received primary custody of the children, but I did not ask. Tom ensured their well-being. Our assets were evenly divided, and Tom gave me a generous Christmas gift the following year to help me financially. He clarified that the money came from Mandy's future inheritance. Bob's divorce unfolded similarly, but their house was shared property. However, shortly after the divorce, Bob and Helen resumed dating, and I'm quite certain they'll end up back together. It's a shame. As for Mandy and me, there's no way I'll ever take her back. I somewhat believed her apologies and think she still loves me. My issue is that her betrayal completely crushed my love for her, leaving it in the dust of her betrayal on the beaches of Bice. I can't love her anymore, even for the sake of the kids. We're very polite to each other, but that's the extent of it. One day, while waiting for the children to join her, Mandy expressed curiosity about how I knew about the situation in Bice. I responded, attributing it to my love for tan lines. She seemed puzzled, stating that she was always in a bikini and we never visited a beach. I prompted her to think about her routine when cleaning the bathroom with various chemicals. She explained that she gathered everything she needed, put on plastic gloves, and rolled up her sleeves. I pointed out that she forgot one thing she always did first, taking off her rings, including her engagement and wedding rings, leaving no tan line on her finger. I've always believed that life can throw unexpected surprises your way. Sometimes they're good, and sometimes they leave a lasting impact. This is the story of one such surprise. A night that started well but ended in a way I never imagined. I'd been dating Jenna for a few months. We met at a friend's party and there was an instant connection. Jenna had this contagious laugh and a way of making everyone feel special. We had our differences, but they added spice to our relationship instead of causing problems. One evening, we decided to go on a date. We began with dinner at La Bella, a cozy Italian restaurant downtown. The atmosphere was perfect, the food delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. As the night went on, Jenna suggested we go to Murphy's Dive, a local bar where our friends and coworkers often hung out. I thought it was a great idea. What better way to end the evening than with good company and a few drinks? Murphy's was lively when we arrived, filled with familiar conversations, laughter, and clinking glasses. We mingled, chatted with friends, and everything seemed perfect. A couple of hours later, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I entered, I noticed familiar shoes under a stall. I paused, trying to place them, when I heard a voice that sent chills down my spine. It was unmistakably one of my CO workers saying, "Do that thing." My heart raced as I pieced together the puzzle. Those were Jenna's shoes. A whirlwind of emotions hit me. anger, betrayal, shock. Without a second thought, I headed straight to the bar, asked the bartender to split our check, paid for my drinks, and left Murphy's without waiting for Jenna. I drove around aimlessly, trying to process what had happened. I ended up at a 24-hour diner, ordering a black coffee and staring into it, the bitter taste matching my mood. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I crashed at my buddy Mike's place. He's the kind of friend who doesn't ask questions when you show up. He just handed me a beer, and we played video games until dawn. The next day, my phone was blowing up. Jenna had texted a dozen times, and there were a few missed calls. She apologized, said it was a mistake, that she was drunk, but honestly, it all sounded like noise to me. I took a few days off work, unable to face my TO worker or the office gossip that was sure to follow. Mike and I hung out, binge-watched shows, and ordered way too much takeout. It was a good distraction. A week later, I finally met up with Jenna. We sat in a park, and she cried, a lot. She said it meant nothing, that she regretted it instantly. I just felt numb. I told her I needed space to think. Part of me thinks maybe it was just a one-time mistake, but another part wonders if I can ever trust her again. What would you do? I messed up big time. I wrote a post on a subreddit about wanting an open relationship, and my husband found out, leading to a huge fight with hurtful words. Upset, I left home for a walk. A CO worker, the man I wanted an open relationship with, called and invited me to his house. Frustrated, I decided to go along with it. I asked him to pick me up, and we went back to his house, had drinks, and watched TV. Feeling frisky, I made a move, but it was disappointing. He ignored me, went back to the TV, and after an hour, he started straddling me. I went along with it, but the closeness was terrible. He refused to go down on me, citing a sore tongue from eating Pringles. So we went straight to bed, which was awkward. He forgot to pull out. Afterward, he went back to watching TV, and I went home. Reflecting on the walk back, I realized I just wanted excitement to escape the routine. The reality of closeness outside my marriage didn't live up to expectations. My husband, with his experience, is far better. I was harsh in my last post, criticizing his size, but thinking it over, he's around 7 inches. Not that small. I let a fantasy take over. When I got home, my husband was in the kitchen, unresponsive. He cooked pasta, didn't share, and went to sleep in the living room after tossing a towel at me. I fell asleep after finding a rug. I tried talking to him on the couch, but he ignored me. I woke up early due to the cold since the heater in my room was off. This gave me more time to think, and I realized I messed up and needed to be a better wife. I attempted to talk to my husband all day, but he remained unresponsive. When I made a move on him, he rejected me and left the room, something he had never done before. Even when tired, he'd at least go down on me, but today he seemed disinterested in everything. I hadn't noticed him eating or drinking anything all day. He just looked tired. When I tried sitting him down to talk, he got up and left the house. Calling him went to voicemail, so I texted him, expressing my love and the need to talk for the sake of our marriage. He replied that he no longer wants a conversation or a marriage with me. He's planning to stay elsewhere until the new year. Upon his return, he expects me to be gone. He claimed ownership of the house, contacted a lawyer, and wants communication through her, not using his old number. I found out he's staying at my sister's house, and I'm worried she might make a move, as she's attractive and single. I texted her, but she said she loves me but won't support me after what I did, suggesting we shouldn't talk for a while. I feel betrayed. I love my sister but hate her for what she's doing. I hope my husband doesn't let her have her way. It's been a long day, and I don't know what to feel or do. I just want things to be normal again. Sorry for the essay, I needed to vent. I messed up, but I never thought it would get this bad.
Reflecting on high school now feels like looking back at a distant past. I was just an ordinary teenager, grappling with identity, friendships, and the intensity of first love. My parents were supportive but often busy, which gave me plenty of time to ponder life's uncertainties. Being introspective was both a blessing and a curse, shaping my future in unexpected ways. In those years, I experienced my first deep crush, fixating on someone who seemed to represent all my dreams. I was infatuated with the head cheerleader, believing our feelings were mutual and that we were destined to be together. We were inseparable until one night in May, when I saw her with someone else, shattering my world. Devastated, I drove aimlessly, even briefly contemplating crashing into a tree. But I kept going, hoping my parents could offer some guidance. When I got home, my parents were out, and the loneliness hit hard. In a moment of despair, I even tried to access my dad's weapon safe, but it was locked. Now I realize how irrational my teenage mind was, overwhelmed by something that seems trivial today. I fell asleep waiting for my parents and woke up to a beautiful spring day, feeling a deep sense of shame. We talked for an hour, and I gained a new perspective on my worth. I never spoke to the girl again, ignoring her attempts to apologize. I didn't even ask for the expensive necklace I had given her. After a week, she showed up at my door, but my grandmother sent her away, telling her to move on because I had. Prom came and went. She went with the other guy. I don't know how their night turned out, but I suspect the sugar in his gas tank delayed their fun. That experience hardened me, making me more guarded in relationships. Years later, my wife Emma found a note in a used book I had bought online. Confused, I explained it was The Wrong Man, a book about the Sam Shepard trial, but the note led to an unexpected confrontation. Emma was upset, pushing a piece of notebook paper under my nose. The note was written in delicate, feminine handwriting. "Jeff, you need to divorce that witch you're married to before she drives you crazy enough to destroy her. I'll wait for you, but not forever. Your love, Daddy." P.S. We had fun one last time. I expect to see those divorce papers signed soon. I was shocked, struggling to understand. Could it be a prank? Emma was clearly angry. I spent the next half hour explaining that I bought the book online and hadn't looked through it yet. The note must have belonged to the previous owner. But what are the chances the owner's name was also Jeff? The timing was terrible. Last year, I made the mistake of getting too close to a female co-worker, Sharon Roberts. We flirted, and it escalated to dinner. Sharon even proposed to me, and I was tempted. My marriage with Emma was struggling, but I realized I loved Emma and needed to fix things at home. That night, I confessed to Emma that our marriage needed work. Admitting my near infidelity was a mistake, but after some rough weeks, I convinced her that she was the only one for me. She seemed to believe me, until she found that note. Adding to the tension, I'd been working late for the past 3 months, hoping for a promotion. I wanted to prove myself, especially since Emma's parents never thought I was good enough for her. But all that time away had become a sore point. Emma had also been spending more time with her mother, who never liked me. After a big fight about my work hours, I foolishly called her mother a witch, the same word used in the note. Things only got worse from there. I know some of you might be thinking, just give up, you've been caught. But I swear I'm innocent. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, unable to convince Emma that the note wasn't mine. She locked our bedroom door. On Thursday, I told my boss I need to cut back on work hours. He understood, having gone through a divorce himself. I brought Emma flowers, and though she didn't throw them away, the coldness between us remained. By Friday night, things were still tense. Emma decided to spend the weekend at her parents' house. I asked her not to go, but she said she needed time to think. I bit my tongue, knowing that her mother's influence wouldn't help. I spent the weekend thinking about how to fix our marriage, taking long walks with our dog, Samson, and reflecting on how much I love Emma. On Saturday night, I texted her, "Would you consider counseling?" Her response was brief, "We'll talk when I get home Sunday night." Sunday passed, and that night I got another message. "Drank too much at dinner. We'll be home Monday." My frustration grew. I was innocent, and I knew a weekend at her mom's was a bad idea. On Monday morning, Emma came home just as I was about to leave for work. She gave me a half-hearted kiss and said, "We'll talk tonight," before rushing upstairs to get ready for work. I worked a full day but made sure to pick up Chinese takeout and have it ready by the time she got home. Our dinner was quiet, polite but not warm. After dinner, Emma broke the silence. "Jeff, I don't trust you, and that's not how I should feel about my husband. Mom thinks I should leave." I cut in. "Let's leave your mother out of this. This is about us." "I need space and time to think. I suggest you move into the spare bedroom until we figure things out." I hated the idea. How does sleeping in separate rooms help us solve our problems? What about counseling? Maybe, but not right now. Right now, I need time for myself. I couldn't help asking, does thinking for yourself include your mother? My mom only wants what's best for me. If I need to talk to her, I will. That was the end of our conversation. I moved into the spare room and spent the night wide awake. Thinking back, I met Emma while consulting for an NGO where she was interning. I had just graduated from Wharton and was working at a top accounting firm. I was assigned to the NGO to help with their computer systems, and everything went well. The NGO got a new server, and I met my future wife. Emma was about to start her senior year at Princeton, and we spent that summer dating. She was smart, confident, and had the looks of a model. Despite her upper-class background, she treated everyone kindly, from the clerks to the president. Physically, we were a good match, but socially, we came from different worlds. Emma was an only child from a wealthy family. while I was one of 4 kids in a middle-class home. My mom was a second-grade teacher, and my dad owned a mechanic shop. I graduated from Kent State and later earned an MBA from Wharton. I eventually took a job at TMG2 Engineering Inc., where I now work as a project manager in IT, leading a significant project to migrate our systems to the cloud. Tuesday morning, I woke up in the spare bedroom. After getting my bearings, I went downstairs to find coffee ready. Emma was upstairs showering, and though I briefly considered joining her, I decided to give her the space she wanted. I drank my coffee and then got ready for work in the guest bathroom. The strain between us continued all week. Emma was working long hours, so I threw myself into my project, which seemed to please my boss. On Friday, I texted Emma, "Can I take you out to dinner tonight? You pick the place?" 10 minutes later, she replied, "Going to my mom's, spending the weekend." Frustrated, I called her to reason with her. "How can we work on our marriage if you're not here?" "I told you I needed time," she replied calmly. "It's only been a week. You need to respect that." I tried to convince her to stay, but she wouldn't budge. She finally agreed to consider counseling. "Will I see you before you leave for Manhattan tonight?" "No, I'm already packed. I'll probably be back Monday night. I'll go straight to work from New York." So, it was another weekend alone with Samson. 2 more days to figure out how to fix what was broken. On Saturday, I had an idea. I called the used bookstore where I bought The Wrong Man and spoke to a salesperson. "Hi, I bought The Wrong Man from your store a few weeks ago, and inside was a romantic note from someone named Jeff. My wife found it and thinks I'm having an affair. I need to contact the original Jeff who owned the book." The salesperson laughed. "Man, what are the odds? A book called The Wrong Man owned by 2 guys named Jeff, and with a love note inside. Look, this isn't funny. My wife needs proof that I'm not the Jeff who got that note. Can you check your system to see if the previous owner is registered? We can track sellers if they have an account, but I can't give out their info. Could you at least contact him and ask him to call me?" "Sure, what's your name?" "Jeff," I replied. "As in the author?" he asked. "What author?" I was confused. He laughed again. "T. Jefferson Parker, the mystery writer." This conversation was ridiculous, but I had to clarify. "I'm Jeffrey Parker, not Jefferson, and there's no T in my name." I gave him my number and was surprised when my phone rang 20 minutes later. "My name is Jeff, and I hear you found a note meant for me. Is this some kind of blackmail?" "No, not at all. I bought The Wrong Man and found a note from a woman named Terry. I need you to tell my wife that the note was meant for you, not me." "The note was in a book? Damn, I've been looking for that note everywhere. If my wife found it, I'd be in big trouble. I can't believe it ended up in that book." "Jeff, I need you to help me out here." "No way. I dodged that bullet, and I'm not getting involved." He hung up. Frustrated, I took a few minutes to calm down and then called him back. "Jeff, it's Jeff. I've changed my mind. This is blackmail. If you don't send me a notarized statement saying Terry wrote that note to you, I'll send a copy to your wife. How does that sound?" "Man, that's cold." "Not as cold as it's been in my house since my wife found that note." Okay, I'll send the statement, but you promise it's over after that?" "Absolutely. Just get it notarized and send it to me." I gave him my address and waited. Emma and I became physical engaged 5 weeks into dating while working at an NGO, and by summer's end, we were exclusive. During her senior year, I frequently drove 60 miles to Princeton to see her, and we spent Thanksgiving at her parents' New York apartment. Her mother was cold, but I hoped to win her over. Emma spent winter break with my family, where she felt at home. Her parents likely thought our relationship was just a phase, expecting it to fade like her previous ones. By June, I proposed, and she accepted. Living in Philadelphia, close to her parents in Manhattan, was ideal. However, after we got engaged, her mother tried to break us up. Emma resisted, but her mother continued to undermine our marriage subtly, a problem I didn't fully grasp until much later. Her parents' attitudes complicated my decisions. Should I focus on my career to impress them or spend more time with Emma? It's a tough balance many young professionals face. When Emma returned from her parents' house on Monday, she was still distant. I decided to wait for an email from the other Jeff before talking to her, continuing to sleep in the guest room. Desperate, I did something I'd sworn off. I read her emails. While she showered, I copied them to an external drive. Reading them confirmed my fears. Her mother was trying to turn Emma against me. She encouraged Emma to move to New York and transfer to her company's office. There was also a message from a guy named Grant Martin about staying in touch. Despite our strained relationship, Emma's responses gave me hope. She expressed love for me and a desire to save our marriage, despite her mother's influence. Later that evening, I received a notarized letter from the other Jeff confirming he was the one who wrote the note in the book. When Emma came home, I had dinner ready. After eating, I handed her the letter, and her expression softened. She sat on my lap, kissed me, and said, "This makes me very happy, Jeff. Almost as happy as having you back in my arms." We talked about her feelings of being an accessory in her parents' lives, and she explained how her mother had recently tried to rebuild their relationship. Her mother even advised against starting a family, fearing it would ruin Emma's career just as she believed it had ruined her own. I was stunned. Emma had wanted to start a family last year, but now her mother was driving a wedge between us. When I questioned if there was someone else, Emma assured me she would never cheat. Still concerned about her spending weekends in New York, I suggested a getaway. But Emma declined, saying her mother had invited her to see The Merchant of Venice. Disappointed, I agreed to postpone our trip. By Thursday, I took a risky step. I sent fake emails to her mother and Grant Martin, designed to infect their computers with viruses that would give me access to their emails. It was a dangerous move, but I felt it was necessary. Looking back, our wedding, orchestrated by Lois Taylor, felt more like a show than a celebration. Despite her disapproval, she hosted a lavish affair. My family kept things simple, while the Taylors invited everyone they knew. The whole event felt like a farce. The first few years of our marriage were good, balanced between work and fun. Living in Philadelphia, away from her parents, gave us peace. We even talked about starting a family, beginning with getting a dog named Samson. However, just as we were ready for kids, things began to unravel. By Thursday night, both Grant and Lois had opened the fake emails, and I gained access to their correspondence. What I discovered was shocking. Grant was having an affair with Emma's mother, and they were planning to set him up with Emma. Despite this, I decided to confront the situation directly. After arranging for Samson to stay at a kennel, I took the Amtrak to Manhattan, determined to save my marriage. By the time I arrived, I had a plan. I bought a Yankees cap, a cheap camera, and staked out her parents' house. While waiting, a woman approached, noticing my obvious surveillance. She offered to help, revealing herself as a private investigator. Surprised by her offer, I agreed to pay her for photos of Emma and Grant if they met. What started as a simple stakeout had turned into something far more complex. Her words stung, but she continued. "This neighborhood is full of wealthy people with shady morals. I'm here all night, watching the building next door, waiting for a lawyer to sneak out with his mistress. His wife hired me to get evidence." She extended her hand. "I'm Karen Withany." As Karen talked, I kept my eyes on Emma's building. Soon, Emma walked out with a man I assumed was Grant. "There they are," Karen said, quickly snapping photos before they got into a cab. "Got them. Now what?" "Now I focus on the building next door. Let's sit for a minute. It's still early." We sat on a nearby bench. "First, give me your email, and I'll send the pictures. That'll be $100. If you want more when they return, it's another $100. "Sure. If you give me the guy's name for $300 more, I can dig up information. We'll need a contract for that." "With your agency?" "No, I'm a freelancer. Today I'm working as a contractor for the agency hired by the lawyer's wife." "And it's okay to hire you directly?" "As long as it doesn't interfere with my contract work. It's not a conflict." I texted Karen my email and Grant's full name. We chatted for a while, and I ended up telling her the whole story of why I was trying to save my marriage. Karen turned out to be a great listener. Curious, I asked, "How did you become a private investigator?" She laughed. "I spent 15 years with the NYPD, 6 in counterterrorism. After getting shot in the leg and losing everything below the knee, I went on disability." She pulled up her pant leg to reveal a prosthetic. "Now, I use my skills to make money and set my own schedule. It's working out so far. I usually don't work weekends, but I'm doing a favor for a friend." As she spoke, Karen snapped a few photos of a couple getting into a limo across the street. "Are you going to follow them?" "No, it's too risky. I'll grab a bite nearby and wait for them to return. Most just have dinner and head back to a love nest. There's not much romance in these cases." "So what do mistresses get besides dinner?" "You'd be surprised. Some women earn as much as a good secretary. They're willing to sell their soul." "No thanks. What about the wives?" "Wives are half our business. Some poor guy working 60 hours a week finds out someone else is getting what should be his. The worst is when DNA tests show the kids aren't his. Those cases end badly. I had one client break into his ex-wife's house and liquidate himself on her bed." "That must have hit her hard." "Not really. She was out of town. The housekeeper found the body, and by the time she got back from a spa in Cannes, the place was cleaned up and repainted. There aren't many happy endings in this business. We sat quietly for a moment. I wasn't going to do anything drastic, but I realized how much I'd miss my wife if we divorced. "If you're getting a snack, can I join you?" She shook her head. "No, Jeff. Go home. I'm meeting my husband at the diner. He'll be there in 10 minutes. She pointed to her wedding ring, which I noticed for the first time. What a detective I am, missing that detail. As we walked, I realized I was limping, too focused on my problems. I tried to change the subject. "Does this work affect your marriage?" "It affects some of my coworkers, but I'm lucky. My husband, Bill, understands my job. He makes sure I know I'm loved, like tonight when he arranged for his mom to watch our boys so we could have dinner together." As we neared the diner, I saw a tall, fit man waiting. He was my height, but more muscular. Karen hugged him, and he kissed her while keeping an eye on me. "Bill, this is Jeff, my new client. Jeff, this is my husband, Bill." We shook hands, both giving firm but not overpowering grips. Bill smiled and asked, "Tight end?" "Good guess. Did you play?" "No, I was a heavyweight wrestler at Penn State." His smile grew wider as he hugged Karen. "Hungry?" he asked me. "No thanks. I'm heading to the train station. Karen, send me the contract when you can. I'll sign it and return it with payment." "Thanks for taking my case." Karen laughed. "Is that the right word?" I shook Bill's hand again. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Bill. You're a lucky man, but I think you're both lucky. Thanks for inviting me to dinner. You both give me hope." Bill glanced at Karen, who whispered, "I'll explain." I left with a smile. Sunday morning, I overslept, catching up on missed sleep. After brewing coffee, I started my laptop and downloaded all of Grant's archived emails. I also decided not to wait for Karen to call, but to reach out to her later that morning to find out what had happened Saturday night after I left. With coffee and a bagel, I began reading Grant Martin's emails. It quickly became clear that Grant was a manipulative idiot. Lois Taylor wasn't the only married woman he was involved with, and one email in his outbox answered many of my questions. The email read, "Dennis, it's time to return the favor. I've been entertaining a high society woman for the past 4 months. She's so snobbish she only gives me the time of day because of my so-called pedigree. What she doesn't know is my father disowned me years ago. You're probably wondering why I'm bothering with her. 2 reasons. Her daughter's a knockout, and the old lady is trying to wreck her daughter's marriage so she can set me up with her. Once we're together, she thinks we can keep seeing each other without anyone suspecting. Can you believe that? I also work for her husband, who's clueless. She's pushing her daughter to leave her husband, and I'm just waiting to swoop in. But I'm not the marrying type. Oh, and this woman is worth millions. I'm sending you a burner phone. When I call, pretend to be my father. I need you to play along. Don't mess it up. Remember, you owe me, from last year, your brother, TK Grant." Reading that, I almost felt sorry for Lois, but only for a second. This was way beyond what I could handle on my own, and I hoped Karen could help me figure out the next steps. While waiting for Karen's call, I spent hours on my computer, monitoring everything Grant did online. I even managed to get his user ID and password for his bank. By 2 p.m., I couldn't wait any longer and called Karen. "Hi, Jeff. I've been expecting your call. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday. Please apologize to your husband and kids, but I need to know. What happened last night after I left? You'll be pleased to hear that your wife came back in a cab just after 10 o'clock. Grant walked her to the door, trying to convince her to let him in. She refused. He tried to kiss her, but she turned away and he only got her cheek. The doorman didn't let him in either. Grant left, clearly upset. So your wife didn't give in to his advances. She got home at a decent time and nothing inappropriate happened, except for going on the date in the first place." I was relieved Emma hadn't slept with Grant, but still angry about our crumbling marriage. "Remember what you told me last night? Her mother set her up. It doesn't excuse everything, but it explains a lot." "Agreed. But you should know this. It seems Grant is also involved with your mother-in-law, and Lois is trying to destroy your marriage to keep him around." "No kidding, that's cold. I've seen a lot in this business, but people's cruelty still shocks me. How did you find this out? If I tell you, is there some sort of client-detective confidentiality?" "No, Jeff. If I'm subpoenaed, I have to tell. So, if it's illegal, you need to decide whether to share it." I thought for a moment and then decided to tell her how I got the emails. Like many others, she was stunned by what I had done. I also mentioned that I had Martin's user ID and password to his bank accounts. You can really access this guy's computer and see his passwords? Yes, maybe later this week you can teach me how to protect myself from people like me. But for now, I'm going back to my family. We're watching The Wizard of Oz, and my kids are giving me the "when are you getting off the phone?" look. Sorry, Karen. Call me tomorrow when you dig up more on Martin's background, and I'll fill you in on the rest. With that, we hung up, and I continued to go through Grant and Lois's emails. By Sunday evening, when Emma returned, I had gathered a lot of information but had no idea how to use it. All my belongings were still in the guest room. Emma burst into the kitchen where I was sitting with a beer. "Jeffrey, where are your clothes?" I ignored her question. "How was your date last night?" Her face showed a mix of guilt, shock, and confusion. "What are you talking about? I didn't go on a date." Emma said it with such conviction that I might have believed her if I hadn't seen her get into the cab with my own eyes. "What do you call going to a play with an unrelated man? You might want to look up the definition." There was that look again. "Were you following me?" "Not that it matters, but I went into town yesterday. I was planning to convince you and your mom that I should take you to the play. I arrived just in time to see you getting into a cab with some guy. Who was it?" I lied, but it sounded plausible, and I didn't want Emma to know what I really knew. "Jeff, my mom got sick at the last minute, and a friend of my parents drove me. Nothing happened." I pretended to be clueless. "And who is this kind friend? Does he have a name?" "Grant Martin. He works for my father." I decided to push her. "Emma, this is ridiculous. Your parents are trying to split us up. Think about it. I'll bet you $1,000 your mom miraculously recovered on Sunday. This illness was staged. How did Grant Martin just happen to be available at the last minute? It's time to wake up and realize our marriage is on the brink." Emma looked shocked, as if she'd been slapped. I didn't want the argument to escalate, so I left the kitchen and went to the guest room. It was a restless night, and I ended up leaving the house early, arriving at the office before 7. At 8, I got a notification on my phone. Emma had sent 2 texts to Sharon Roberts. I figured she had already talked to her mom, and Lois was filling her head with more nonsense. My marriage was circling the drain. Late Monday night, Karen called me at work. "Are you somewhere private?" I closed my office door. "Yes. What's up?" "First, remind me about Grant Martin's position at the bank. I've been focusing on his non-work activities." I glanced at my notes. "From what I've seen, he's a personal banker handling trust accounts and money management for wealthy clients. Yesterday, I watched him set up wire transfers for 2 clients. I'll confirm the transactions later when I'm home. I don't want to use my work computer." "Did any of those transfers go to foreign banks?" "One went to France for a rich kid's tuition and living expenses in Paris." Karen paused before continuing. "I dug up some dirt on Grant. He had serious issues in college, enough that his family disowned him. He moved to New York to escape his past. I also talked to a friend in the NYPD. Last year, a college buddy of Grant's, Dennis Riley, stayed with him for a weekend. Riley picked up a girl at a bar, brought her back to Grant's place, and when she drank too much, Riley refused to call her a cab and instead attacked her. When she reported it, Riley claimed it was consensual, and Grant backed him up, saying the girl even hit on him. The DA dropped the case because it was 2 against 1. So Riley got away with it because Grant lied for him? Exactly. I read Karen the first line of Grant's letter to Dennis. She paused. Looks like Riley owes Grant big time for covering for him. How do you feel about getting back at these 2? One's a rapist and the other's his enabler. No question. What's your plan? You mentioned you could access Grant's computer. How skilled are you? Could you use his identity to open foreign accounts and transfer his clients' money? I know how to access his computer, but I'm not an expert in opening accounts. And I'm not interested in stealing money. If we do this right, no one will lose money. But we need to discuss it in person. Can you meet tomorrow night? I'd like to bring a friend. Karen, I have to ask, why are you doing this without expecting more payment? I agreed to pay you a few thousand for watching Emma and digging up dirt on Grant. Now we're talking about opening accounts and transferring money. What's in it for you? I can't afford to pay more, and I certainly can't afford to get caught. This is personal, Jeff. Years ago, someone pilled and attacked me. I was too embarrassed to report it right away, and by the time I did, there was no evidence left. I filed a complaint, but it went nowhere because it was just my word against his. So I'm doing this for that girl Dennis Riley attacked. She deserves to know not every prick gets away with it, and Grant Martin is going down too for helping him. They're both trash. Karen's voice softened as she shared her story, clearly still painful for her. Although I had only known Karen for a few days and spent a few hours with her, I was already determined to help her take down these pricks. As my grandmother used to say, sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks, even if it involves breaking the law. Before we ended the call, Karen asked me to send her all the information I had gathered from Martin's computer, bank accounts, loans, mortgages, and so on. I promised to get it to her that night. We also arranged to meet on Tuesday night. I made up an excuse to Emma about working late, but it didn't matter much since we were barely talking and sleeping in separate rooms. That Tuesday night, I met Karen at a quiet pub. She brought along a friend, Hank, who seemed like he had a background in intelligence, probably from one of the agencies. After I told Hank that I had access to Grant Martin's computer and his banking systems, they laid out their plan. First, we buy a plane ticket to Dubai for Martin using his credit card. Next, we open an account in Dubai under his name. Dubai is a popular place for hiding illicit funds since Switzerland got into trouble with the U.S. Treasury. Then we set up wire transfers of several $1 million to Dubai scheduled for early in the day. I interrupted. Wait, no stealing. Hank reassured me. Don't worry, none of the money will actually leave the country. We'll make a small mistake in the transfer instructions that delays it, making it look like Martin tried to steal the money but messed up. I thought for a moment and then agreed. Okay, so what's next? Martin has a line of credit with over $100,000 available and $60,000 in a brokerage account. We'll transfer those funds to the Dubai account, and those transfers will go through. Do you have a problem with that? Not if it's his own money being transferred. Good. With his funds drained, he won't be able to afford a good lawyer, which will help us go after his buddy, Dennis Riley. Karen added, and the final step is to send a fake letter from Grant to Dennis. Here, read this. She handed me the letter. Dennis, forget about rich old women. I've got bigger plans. By tomorrow, I'll have enough money to last a long time, at least until I find another rich target. I'm leaving the country. Nothing here is worth sticking around for. I got a call today from an investigator asking about your little incident last year. You should have learned your lesson at USC, like I did. Make sure you get approval before you pull that stunt again, because I won't be around to cover for you. I'll let you know where I end up. I'm sure the feds will monitor this email after tomorrow, so don't respond. I'll delete this as soon as it's sent. Your brother, T.K. Grant. After reading, I smiled. You nailed his style, especially the misogynistic tone. Karen replied, I also found out why Martin's family disowned him. He and another guy attacked a girl at USC. She had a reputation, and after the incident, she eliminated herself. The family paid off the girl's family to keep it quiet and cut ties with Grant. This wasn't the first time they'd bailed him out. Karen's story only strengthened my resolve to take down Martin and Riley. Okay, I can handle all that with Hank's instructions, but we need to make sure Grant is at home, not at his computer when this goes down. How do we do that? Don't worry. Grant will be occupied. We've got it covered. Can we do it tomorrow night? No problem. What's the plan for Thursday? Grant will be arrested early Thursday morning before he has a chance to act. It'll look like he was about to flee the country. It's a pleasure working with professionals. Karen and Hank were indeed professionals. With Hank's guidance, everything went smoothly. Grant opened a new account in Dubai, his credit card was used to buy a first-class ticket to Dubai, and the line of credit and brokerage account were set up. The wire transfers were ready for Thursday morning, but the big transfer was intentionally botched, so it never went through. To ensure Grant was in his apartment all night, they used an expensive escort, likely a tactic Hank learned in his former line of work. The escort accidentally bumped into Grant after work and convinced him to have a drink with her. Grant, being full of himself, thought his charm had won her over and ended up taking her back to his apartment for another drink. The woman, experienced in deception, told Grant she had been mistreated by a guy before and wouldn't let it happen again. She demanded to see his ID. Grant, thinking with his little head, shrugged and handed over his driver's license. Sensing she wanted more, she then asked for his passport. Without questioning her logic, Grant fetched it from his office. She flipped through the pages, making small talk about his trips, then put the passport down, grabbed his tie, and led him to bed. At 8 a.m. Thursday, Grant Martin opened his door to find 2 detectives waiting. Despite his claims of innocence, he was quickly arrested, especially after they noticed his passport lying on the table. Planning a trip, Mr. Martin? One detective asked, while handcuffing him. Grant knew he had been set up, but didn't know by whom or how. All traces of the viruses on his and Lois's computers had been erased. I had sent a command to wipe his hard drive before the police arrived, making it seem like Grant had done it to cover his tracks. The police eventually retrieved copies of Grant's emails, including one confessing to giving a false statement, and another outlining his plan to flee the country with stolen money. Thanks to Karen's contacts, the police offered to drop the false statement charges if Grant testified against Dennis Riley. True to his nature, Grant took the deal, leading to Dennis's extradition. Once Dennis learned of Grant's betrayal, the two turned on each other, tearing each other apart in court. Grant received no support from his family this time. Despite his protests, he was found guilty of theft and related charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Dennis, with Grant's testimony against him, got 10 years. By the time Grant testified, the two hated each other so much that Grant's testimony was especially damning. While this unfolded, I had personal matters to address. The day after Grant's arrest, I met with my father-in-law, Mr. Taylor. I have some things that could hurt Emma if she sees them, but I think you should decide what to do with them. I hired a private investigator to understand why my marriage was falling apart, and I hope you're as shocked by this as I am. I handed Jonathan a folder of Lois's emails to Grant, avoiding any mention of how I got them. Jonathan read the letters slowly, pausing only to pour us both coffee. I was impressed that he served it himself instead of calling for help. When he finished, he looked at me, clearly troubled. I asked you not to hurt my daughter. Knowing her mother used her like this would devastate Emma. I'm sorry. Then don't show her. I promise I won't bring it up during the divorce. So you plan to divorce Emma? That would hurt her too. That's not my choice. Your wife is determined to end your marriage, and she's convincing Emma it's the right thing to do. Please, call me Jack, he said, surprising me. Tell me more. I don't understand how Lois became so controlling of Emma. I explained. Lois told Emma she gave up her career for her, that she was too young when she married and had Emma, and that you stopped her from pursuing a career. She's been laying guilt on Emma. Jack listened intently as I continued. Emma feels she never had a real relationship with you or her mother. Seeing how my family interacts, she realized something was missing. When Lois finally started paying attention to her, Emma jumped at the chance for a connection. Jack was hard to read, but he suddenly became more candid. Do you know what it's like to turn 60 and realize your life is a mess? No, I don't. I'm just venting. Lois claims she gave up her career. What a joke. The only things she's pursued are manicures and spa treatments. She always talked about being a professional tennis player. But after years of lessons, she still can't hit a decent backhand. I've spent most of my life building this bank, working long hours to make it successful. That's how I was raised. We didn't expect to be best friends with our wives. We focused on business. I spent more time with my golf buddies than with my family because that's what Lois wanted. But until today, I had no proof of her cheating. I was blissfully ignorant. His honesty caught me off guard, and all I could say was, I'm sorry I had to be the one to bring this to your attention. No, Jeff. I'm grateful you brought this to me. It's one thing to have an affair, but it's another to sacrifice Emma's happiness to keep your lover around, especially with one of my employees. Grant was walking around the office, smug, knowing he was with my wife. Well, he won't be for a while. He was arrested this morning for stealing from a client and providing false information in a criminal case. If what we heard from the police is true, Grant Martin will be gone for a long time. As for Lois, she has her own trust fund worth millions, which works in my favor. During the divorce, that she'll be lounging at the spa or on the tennis court, shedding crocodile tears. Some new guy will pick her up and I'll be easily replaced. She'll lose some social standing. Other wives will avoid her to protect their own marriages. She'll also lose her relationship with Emma. But from what I've seen here, Jack held up the folder, she probably won't care much about that. And Emma? I wonder if it's too late to rebuild a relationship with my daughter. I do love her, but I let Lois control our relationship. That's another thing I owe Lois for. Somehow, I'll make her pay for all the pain she's caused. Maybe not right away, but I will. In the meantime, Jeff, I need your help. You say you love Emma. Do you think you can repair your marriage? I don't know, Jack. Logically, it's not her fault. She was manipulated by her mother, and it helps that she didn't sleep with Martin. At least I don't think so. But emotionally, that's the hard part. I'm not like you. I just showed you proof of your wife's infidelity, and you didn't shed a tear. You were a little angry, but you kept your cool. When Emma walked out that second weekend, I cried for the first time in my adult life. I don't know how you do it. Jonathan Taylor looked at me and made a decision. Because I've been bottling up my emotions for over 40 years. Let me tell you a story not many people know. Right after college, I enrolled in Navy flight school. It was tough, but I passed OCS. I was so proud the day those stripes appeared on my uniform in front of my parents. But then my life turned into a nightmare. I messed up and crashed, broke both legs and my back. Worse, my radar intercept officer, Ted Andrews, was eliminated. I spent 6 weeks in the hospital. When I could walk without crutches, I went to apologize to Ted's parents. I'll never forget the look on their faces, seeing the man responsible for their son's end of life. I returned to the base a broken man. I cried for days. The Navy discharged me and I went home. My parents were kind. They didn't blame me. They sent me to Harvard for my MBA, hoping I could move on. But not a week goes by that I don't think about what I could have done to prevent the accident. It wasn't because I was drunk or hungover. It was just a mistake that cost a man his life. Ted's parents never wanted to hear from me again, but I've dedicated part of my life to his memory. I donate $10,000 every year to the USO and a fund for wounded soldiers. After all that, dealing with an unfaithful wife seems like a small thing. I listened in silence. When he finished, I saw a man carrying a heavy burden for far too long. I realized there was something I could do to help lighten that load. Reflecting on my relationship with Emma, I considered how much her recent behavior had been out of character, driven by a desire to finally connect with a mother who had never shown her love. My thoughts drifted back to the first time I met Emma 8 years ago, during my work with the NGO. I spotted her on a bench at Columbus Square, looking like she could use a friend. I approached her, introduced myself, and we started talking. "Excuse me, I've seen you at the office. I'm Jeff Parker from IT. I extended my hand. She recognized me, but it was clear she had been crying. Instead of shying away, she offered a faint smile. "Yes, I've seen you too. I'm Emma Taylor." She shook my hand. "May I sit down, or would you rather be alone?" "No, please sit." Taking a chance, I asked, "It's clear you've been crying. Do you want to talk about it?" Emma hesitated. "Did you hear the news about the 2 girls in Sudan? Our NGO supported schools in Sudan and other parts of Africa and the Middle East. The girls there were taught reading, writing, domestic skills, and health education, which didn't always sit well with the local population." "No, I've been stuck in the server room all day," I replied. Yesterday in Juba, 2 sisters were dragged out of class by their grandparents, upset that the girls' parents allowed them to be educated. They accused the parents of turning the girls against Allah. This morning we heard the sisters had been mutilated, had their clitoris removed with the local imam's approval. I was speechless. I had heard of such practices but had never encountered it firsthand. Emma continued, "I can't understand how people who claim to follow God can think it's right to destroy what God created." She paused. "Are we really helping or just making things worse?" "I don't have the answers, Emma, but my grandmother taught me something. When I was a kid, I was visiting my grandparents on their farm during a big storm. We saw a funnel cloud and tried to corral all the chickens into the barn. We got most of them in when Grandpa told me to head to the basement. I didn't understand why we were abandoning the rest, but Grandma explained, if you try to save everyone, you might end up saving no one." Emma looked at me with those beautiful eyes, really listening. "I think you could apply your grandmother's wisdom to what your organization does. Save as many girls as you can from a hopeless life. You won't save them all, but don't lose sight of the good you're doing. Your grandmother sounds wise. But why do you say your organization? Don't you work for the NGO?" "Not exactly. I'm with KPMG under contract to upgrade their systems. When this is done, I'll move on to another assignment. That's the life of a consultant. 2 months from now, I could be in California or Virginia. It must be hard to make friends living like that. I can't imagine such a nomadic life. I've only lived in 2 places, here in Manhattan and at Princeton, where I go to school." "You're still in school?" "Yes, I have 1 year left at Princeton. I'm here as an unpaid summer intern." "That must be tough." "Not really. My father believes in community service. He gives me an allowance and covers my tuition, so money's not an issue. When I graduate next spring, I'll try living on my own. For now, I'm focused on my studies and helping out here." "That sounds nice," I said, realizing it might come off as sarcastic, but Emma didn't take offense. "Yeah, I'm lucky. I have friends who struggle to pay tuition and rent. Having financial support makes being a student easier." As Emma spoke, I realized how different she was from the wealthy people I'd met at Wharton. In our 30-minute conversation, she expressed genuine concern for strangers in Sudan and her classmates. I later learned that on the same day we met, she had been hit by a cab on her way to work and had a large bruise on her thigh, which she didn't mention until days later. This was someone worth knowing. But before I could say anything, she surprised me again. "Jeff, You mentioned it's hard to make friends when you're always moving. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Of course, I replied. That was the start of our friendship, which grew into a relationship now threatened by her mother's manipulation. After leaving Jack's office, I returned home. Emma walked in to find dinner on the stove, a bottle of Merlot breathing, and a dozen red roses on the table. It took her a moment to notice the 3 place settings. I see we're expecting guests. Who? Your father. My father? What about my mother? Did something happen to her? No, nothing happened to your mother. Your father and I just want to talk with you. Go wash up. He'll be here any minute. Thank goodness Jack rang the bell right away. I don't think I could have held Emma back much longer. My plans for a quiet dinner were likely too optimistic. The wine was poured and the pasta was on the plates. But as soon as we sat down, Emma demanded to know why her father was there without her mother. Jack took the lead, explaining what Lois had been up to over the past few months. Emma became hysterical, crying, "No, no, no!" until Jack moved with her to the couch where she wept on his chest. I cleaned up the kitchen, took Samson for a walk, and gave them some privacy. When I returned half an hour later, Emma met me at the door, her eyes still red. "Jeff, I'm so sorry. Please tell me you want to stay together." "I do, Emma. I never stopped loving you. My biggest fear was that you had changed your mind and would leave me, but I was wrong. You were manipulated by your mother, and now that's over." "And my father?" "He wants to mend our relationship, but he's afraid I'll be wary after what happened with my mother. He wants us to work on repairing our marriage first. He's going on vacation soon and wants to take us to an island in the Bahamas to get to know us better." "That's wonderful. We'll figure out the details later, but for now, that sounds great. Let's try to eat. I reheated dinner, so the pasta isn't perfect, but it will do." The 3 of us sat down to dinner again, taking the first step toward healing. Though it took almost a year for Jack to find the time for a 2-week vacation with us on the island, he spent most weekends with us, reconnecting with Emma and getting to know the daughter he regretted not bonding with earlier. Like I did when I first met Emma, he was pleasantly surprised by her kindness and selflessness. Having Jack involved in our lives helped Emma recover from her mother's betrayal. Over the next few months, we worked on rebuilding our marriage. It was easier knowing Emma had never cheated or lost her moral compass. The night with Grant was purely platonic. Though Grant had tried, he had met the wrong woman. We eventually spent a week with Jack and Emma on Cat Island in the Bahamas. Emma stayed a few extra days with her father after I returned to work. My project was completed on time and on budget, and I was promoted to IT director with a nice bonus. Emma also had to be convinced she could still wear a bikini on the island despite her new curves. Our son, Paul Jonathan Parker, named after both grandfathers, was born a little over a year after that dinner. Our daughter, Claire Emma Parker, Claire after my mother, was born 2 years later. Jack retired at 63 and now spoils his grandchildren, even buying a small apartment nearby as a second home. Things didn't go as well for Lois. Jack divorced her shortly after our meeting. Though it likely cost him a fortune in legal fees, the evidence of her attempt to destroy her daughter's marriage, along with her millions in trust funds, allowed Jack to walk away without paying alimony and retaining enough assets for a comfortable retirement. Once Lois's scheming became public, she became a pariah. She first moved to Palm Beach, but her reputation followed her. She was denied membership in local tennis clubs and spent 9 months there without making a single friend. She then moved to Palm Springs, thinking distance would help. But though she mingled with the wealthy, she couldn't compete with younger women for attention. Like many aging women with low self-esteem, she resorted to plastic surgery, which unfortunately left her looking unnatural. I only know about her failed facelift because 2 years after Claire was born, Lois showed up at our door. When I answered, it took me a moment to recognize her. I didn't even open the screen door. "Lois, what are you doing here?" I made no effort to hide my lack of warmth. "I want to see my daughter and grandchildren." "Lois, you're not welcome here. No one in this house wants to see you. Now go away." It took everything I had not to shout. "You have no right to keep me from seeing Emma and the kids. Open the door." "You don't get it, Lois. Emma doesn't want to see you and will do everything to keep you from poisoning our kids with your bitterness." I started to close the door, but paused. "What have you done to your face?" The words slipped out. Lois looked stunned as I shut the door. She didn't give up easily. The next day, while I was at work, Lois called the house. Emma later told me the conversation was brief. Emma confirmed that Lois was persona non grata in our home and around the kids. Lois tried to bribe her, offering $10,000 per visit for the kids' college fund. Emma refused. Lois even showed up at the daycare, which led us to get a restraining order. When she tried to call Jack, he laughed and hung up. Last we heard, Lois was back in Palm Springs with a gigolo who had already taken a significant amount of money from her. How sad. Sometimes bad things happen to bad people. It reminded me of my final act against Grant Martin. Using an alias, I sent him a letter, a short 8-sentence poem. Your lawyer said you're innocent, but the jury thought otherwise. For the crime that brought you down, justice found its way. I'm innocent, you said again, but karma had its say. Now you know, a-hole, you messed with the wrong one.
My wife came home that evening with a grin plastered across her face. Before I could ask, she announced that she'd finally been transferred to a new department. According to her, this was the opportunity she had been waiting for: better pay, a more dynamic environment, and most importantly, a team that wasn't, in her words, dull as a butter knife. She seemed genuinely excited about it, so I nodded and congratulated her. It wasn't every day she came home this cheerful, so I figured it must be a big deal. She went on about how this new group of colleagues had already planned something to kick things off. Apparently, they had decided to rent a cabin out in the woods for a weekend to get to know each other better. A bit excessive, if you asked me, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Sounds like a lot of effort for a work outing, I commented casually. She waved it off, explaining that these new colleagues of hers were all about creating a bonding experience. Whatever that meant. Out of curiosity, I asked when this grand event was supposed to take place. She told me they hadn't nailed down all the details yet. We decided to meet up next Friday after work to discuss everything, she said. And we'll be hosting the meeting here at our place. That caught my attention. I wasn't against having people over, but I assumed they'd have it all figured out by now. I thought you said they were organized, I remarked. She laughed and replied, not everything happens overnight. Besides, this is just the first step. It wasn't long before she hit me with a special request. My wife's tone shifted slightly, signaling that she was gearing up for something she thought I might resist. I raised an eyebrow and waited. You know how you can become a bit traditional, she started. I didn't respond, letting her dig herself deeper. Well, my new colleagues are progressive. They're young, enthusiastic, and they think they're going to change the world. You know how it is. I didn't, but I let her continue. Her request was straightforward enough: please, don't make any of your usual jokes. In fact, it'd be better if you just nodded and smiled, no matter what they say. Can you do that for me? I stared at her for a moment, wondering what exactly she thought I was going to do. And what do I get out of this? I asked, half joking. Without missing a beat, she replied, how about I don't hit you over the head with a frying pan? She laughed, clearly amused with herself. I couldn't help but smirk. She knew how to keep things light when she wanted to. Fine, I said. But if they cross any lines, don't expect me to sit there quietly. She nodded, satisfied with my agreement. The rest of the evening was spent discussing logistics. She listed off the snacks she'd need, what furniture might need rearranging, and how we'd set up the living room for the group. I listened, chiming in here and there, but mostly letting her take the reins. She seemed to have it all under control, and I wasn't about to interfere with her enthusiasm. By the end of the conversation, it was clear we were on the same page. Friday evening would be the start of this new chapter for her, and our home would be ground zero for their planning. All right, I said, wrapping up the discussion. We'll be ready for them. By Friday evening, the house was spotless. I'd gone through every room, dusted the shelves, vacuumed the carpets, and even wiped down the windows. For good measure, I set up a couple of those plug-in air fresheners to keep things smelling decent. I wasn't particularly thrilled about hosting a group of strangers, but my wife wanted everything to be perfect, so I figured I might as well put in the effort. Once the work was done, I sat down with a beer, thinking about her earlier comment about her colleagues. It wasn't like her to warn me about how to behave around people, especially not with such a specific tone. It made me wonder if something had already happened with them. My questions were answered soon enough. When her colleagues arrived, they didn't bother with introductions or even basic manners. They burst into the living room like they owned the place, chatting loudly and ignoring us completely. I've hosted plenty of gatherings over the years, but this was a first. I sat there, taking it all in, while my wife threw me a glance and mouthed, "Just let it go." One guy, clearly the loudest of the bunch, didn't waste any time making an impression. He looked around the room and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Wow, I didn't know people hired help for houses this small. My dad hires staff for our summer home," but he let the sentence hang, smirking as if he'd just said something clever. For a moment, the room fell silent. I wasn't about to let that slide. I leaned forward and locked eyes with him. "If you don't apologize right now, you'll be out of this house so fast your dad will need a mop to pick you up off the street." My tone left no room for interpretation. The others looked at him, clearly waiting to see how he'd respond. To his credit, he muttered an apology, though it was clear he wasn't used to being called out. I leaned back, satisfied. The tension eased, and the group eventually settled into a more reasonable rhythm. As the evening progressed, the awkward start faded into the background. They helped themselves to drinks and snacks, filling the house with chatter. One of the women, who seemed to be the unofficial leader of the group, started talking about their plans for the cabin trip. She explained that it was meant to be a sort of informal team-building event to welcome new employees. Spouses, partners, and even friends were welcome to join. The idea was to make it a fun and relaxed weekend. "We've already found the perfect spot," she said, her enthusiasm contagious. "It's this small house in the middle of the woods. There's a barbecue area, plenty of space to hang out, and we'll all stay overnight. It'll be great." The others chimed in, clearly on board with the idea. I had to admit, it sounded better than I expected. What caught my attention was when she mentioned an extra activity planned for the end of the night. "We're keeping it a surprise," she said with a mischievous grin. "But trust me, it'll be worth it. It's completely optional, so no pressure to join in if it's not your thing." That set off a few chuckles among the group, but I wasn't laughing. Surprises weren't my thing, especially not when they involved strangers. "Can we just cut to the chase and tell me what it is?" I asked, half joking but curious enough to want an answer. She shook her head. "Nope," she said. "You'll have to wait and see. It'll ruin the fun if I tell you now." My wife looked at me, as if silently urging me not to push further. "All right then," I said finally, leaning back in my seat. Whatever this surprise was, I'd deal with it when the time came. For now, I figured I'd let them enjoy their moment and keep my thoughts to myself. My wife seemed pleased that I wasn't making a fuss, and I took that as a small win for the evening. After the last of her colleagues left, I closed the door and turned around to find my wife glaring at me, her arms crossed. "You couldn't keep quiet, could you?" she said, her voice sharp. I'd seen her annoyed before, but this was something else entirely. "Do you have any idea who that guy is?" "That's the son of some bigwig with connections to my boss." "Do you know what kind of position you've put me in?" She paced back and forth, clearly trying to control her frustration. I leaned against the door, letting her get it out of her system before responding. "Listen," I said evenly. "I don't care whose son he is. If he comes into my house and acts like a disrespectful idiot, I'm not going to sit there and take it. I'm your husband, not some roommate who'll let things slide just to keep the peace. If he can't behave, he's not welcome here." My tone was firm, and I meant every word. She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. "Do you even understand how this works? He's got connections that could make or break careers at my office. You're not helping me by creating enemies. You're making it harder for me to get ahead." Her words were heated, but I wasn't about to back down. "And what about respect for our home?" I shot back. Am I supposed to let some entitled kid walk all over us just because he knows a few people? That's not how I operate. If he can't handle being called out for his behavior, that's his problem, not mine. I'm not apologizing for standing up for what's right. We stared at each other for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Finally, she sighed and threw up her hands. Fine, she said, her tone softening slightly. Let's just move on. We've got the big day to prepare for, and I need you to be on your best behavior. Can you do that for me? I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced this conversation was over. The following days were busy, and my wife seemed more preoccupied than usual. She spent a lot of time on her phone, typing away with an intensity one hadn't seen before. It was hard not to notice, and eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Who are you texting so much? I asked casually one evening. She glanced up, hesitating for a moment before answering. It's that guy from the party, she said. The one you had the issue with. Apparently, he's the one financing the upcoming corporate event with his dad's money. One of my colleagues is sick, so she asked me to coordinate a few things with him. That's all. Her explanation seemed straightforward enough, but something about it didn't sit right with me. All right, I said, my tone measured. But let me be clear. If I catch him trying to cross any lines with you, I'll handle it my way. And I don't care whose son he is or how much money he's throwing around. I made sure she understood I wasn't joking. She rolled her eyes but nodded. Relax, she said with a half smile. I've got no interest in him, and I'd never let him or anyone else try anything. You don't need to worry about that. Her response was reassuring, but I still made a mental note to keep an eye on things. Better safe than sorry. Getting ready for the corporate event tested my patience more than I'd expected. I'd been ready for an hour, Dior Sauvage, good jeans, a sharp shirt. That's all a man needs. My wife, on the other hand, spent what felt like an eternity deciding what to wear. Dresses, shoes, accessories, it was a parade of options. Meanwhile, I sat on the couch, glancing at the clock every few minutes, resisting the urge to rush her. When she finally emerged, she looked stunning, as she always did. But still, an hour was an hour. The drive to the event was uneventful until we hit the highway. That's when we saw him, the same rich kid from the party. My wife pointed out his car, an expensive, flashy thing that screamed, "Look at me." At the next red light, he rolled down his window and gave us a nod before speeding off. His driving was reckless, weaving between cars like he owned the road. He's going to kill someone one day, I muttered. My wife shrugged, dismissing my comment. That's just how he is, she said, as if that made it acceptable. When we arrived, people were already setting up. The cabin was nestled in the woods, with a barbecue area and enough space for everyone to spread out. I'll admit, it was a nice spot. The atmosphere was relaxed, and for the most part, people seemed friendly. I'd been expecting the worst, but some of her colleagues turned out to be decent. It wasn't long before the grills were fired up, and the smell of cooking meat filled the air. I took over one of the grills, figuring it was better than standing around making small talk. Cooking was something I could handle. By the time I was done, everyone was raving about the steak and burgers I'd prepared. Looks like you found your calling, one of the guys joked. I smirked but didn't respond. Compliments were nice, but I wasn't here to impress anyone. As the evening went on, I couldn't help but notice the rich kid hovering nearby. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it became obvious he was sticking close to our group. He'd engage in short conversations with others, but his eyes kept darting toward us. It was strange. Earlier, he'd been chatting and laughing with everyone, but now he seemed distracted. I decided to confront him, but not in an aggressive way. I'm heading out for a smoke, I said to no one in particular. Then I turned to him. Care to join? He hesitated, but eventually nodded. We walked a bit away from the group, and I lit a cigarette. You've been watching us all evening, I said, cutting to the chase. What's your deal? He shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the ground. Your wife, he said finally. She's beautiful. That's all. I raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. She's wearing this necklace, he continued, and it reminds me of one my grandmother used to wear. She passed away recently, so his voice trailed off. It was an odd explanation, but he seemed sincere. I nodded, acknowledging his loss. Sorry to hear that, I said, keeping my tone neutral. After we finished our cigarettes, he turned to leave but stopped and added, see you at the special event later. Maybe we'll even be on the same team. Then he walked off, leaving me standing there, cigarette still in hand. Team? I thought. What kind of event needed teams? I didn't like the sound of it, but I decided to let it go for now. Whatever they had planned, I'd find out soon enough. The evening took an unexpected turn when everyone was called into the main hall for an announcement. The atmosphere, which had been casual and light-hearted, suddenly became charged with anticipation. One of my wife's colleagues, the unofficial ringleader of the group, decided to make her entrance memorable. She slipped off her heels, climbed onto the table, and grabbed a microphone. I folded my arms, already unimpressed with the theatrics. What now? I muttered under my breath. The room quieted down as she began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, she started, her voice ringing out confidently, it's time to reveal the surprise we've all been waiting for. There were scattered cheers and laughter, but I stayed silent, my patience already wearing thin. She took her time, milking the moment, before finally dropping the bombshell. We're having a swinger party tonight, she announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My jaw clenched, and I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. Did I hear that right? I glanced at my wife, who was sitting beside me. She looked as stunned as I felt, her eyes wide with shock. Before I could say a word, she leaned in and whispered, look, let's just go to one of the rooms and be by ourselves. We don't have to participate in whatever this is. Her tone was pleading, as if she knew I was seconds away from losing my temper. Before I could respond, the rich kid, the same one who'd been a thorn in my side all evening, strolled over with his usual smug expression. What's the matter? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Not your thing? Don't tell me you're too uptight for a little fun. That was it. Without a second thought, I spit in his face. The room went silent, and his smirk vanished instantly. We're done here, I said, grabbing my wife's hand. Let's go. She followed me out, but not without resistance. As soon as we were outside, she yanked her hand away and rounded on me. What the hell is wrong with you? She snapped. You didn't have to do that. You just embarrassed both of us in front of everyone. Her words came fast and sharp, her anger spilling over. You're a heartless idiot who ruins everything. I stopped walking and turned to face her. Listen, I said firmly. If you think I'm going to stand there and tolerate that kind of nonsense, you've got another thing coming. These people are not your friends. They're not even decent. If you want to save this marriage, you're done with them. Do you understand me? My voice was calm but unwavering. I wasn't asking for her opinion, I was laying down the law. Her expression shifted from anger to defiance. You can't just tell me who I can and can't be friends with, she argued. That's controlling and abusive. People's personal lives don't define who they are at work. You're overreacting. Her voice wavered slightly, but she held her ground. I took a step closer, lowering my voice, but keeping my tone firm. Your company reflects who you are. If you want to surround yourself with people who think this kind of behavior is normal, that's on you. But if you want to stay in this marriage, you'll cut ties with them. This isn't a debate. She stared at me, her anger still simmering, but now mixed with something else, maybe resignation. In the end, she didn't have much choice. She muttered something under her breath, then said, fine. Whatever. You win. Her tone was bitter, and I knew she wasn't happy about it. But I wasn't here to make her happy, I was here to protect what mattered. As we drove home, the silence between us was heavy. She was upset, but she'd agreed to my terms. For now, that was enough. After the incident at the event, my wife's behavior began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. She became more reserved, especially when it came to talking about work. Normally, she'd share stories about her colleagues and the day's events, but now her updates were vague, if she gave them at all. It was as though a wall had gone up between us, and I couldn't help but wonder what was behind it. At first, I chalked it up to lingering tension from the argument we'd had, but as the days went by, her odd behavior became harder to ignore. Her late nights at work were the first red flag. It started with the occasional delay, which she'd explain away as catching up on tasks or helping a colleague. But the frequency grew, and so did my suspicion. One evening, when she came home well past her usual time, I decided to confront her. "What's going on?" I asked bluntly. "You've been acting distant, and now these late nights. If this is about what happened at the party, just say so." She sighed, looking more annoyed than anything else. "I'm not talking to them anymore," she said, her tone defensive. "That's what you wanted, right? So there's nothing to tell. Work is just work." Her answer didn't satisfy me. "Then why the late nights?" I pressed. She hesitated, just long enough to make me more suspicious. Finally, she said, "My mom's been sick. She's getting older and she needs help around the house. I've been spending more time with her, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing." Her explanation seemed plausible, and for a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt for questioning her. Helping her mother was something she'd always been diligent about, especially when her mom's health was in decline. "All right," I said, softening my tone. "But if that's the case, why didn't you just tell me from the start?" She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't think it was a big deal. Besides, I figured you'd assume the worst." Her comment stung, but I let it go. Despite her explanation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her behavior around the house added to my unease. She spent hours on her phone, more than I'd ever seen before. At first, I thought she was just scrolling through social media or texting friends, but the intensity of her focus made me wonder if there was more to it. When I asked about it, she dismissed it as work-related or trivial chats. "You're overthinking," she'd say, but her evasiveness only deepened my concerns. Looking back, I realized that my earlier ultimatum might have been too heavy-handed. By cutting her off from those colleagues so abruptly, I might have inadvertently pushed her to hide things from me. It wasn't a comforting thought, but it made sense. If she'd been inclined to confide in me before, my actions might have made that harder for her now. Still, I wasn't about to ignore the signs. I started paying closer attention to the patterns in her behavior. The phone usage, the late nights, the reluctance to talk, it all painted a picture I didn't like. And then there was that nagging thought in the back of my mind, what if the rich kid from the party was somehow involved? He'd been too persistent, too smug. If he'd tried to worm his way back into her life, I needed to know about it. By the time I'd pieced everything together, I knew what I had to do. Confronting her directly hadn't gotten me anywhere, and waiting for her to open up on her own wasn't an option. If she was hiding something, the answers were likely on her phone. That night, after she fell asleep, I decided I'd take a look. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I'd reached the point where I needed the truth, one way or another. After my wife had fallen asleep, I sat in the dimly lit bedroom, contemplating my next move. Her phone lay on the nightstand, the soft glow of its screen almost beckoning me. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but the unanswered questions and strange behavior had left me no choice. I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and began scrolling. My first stop was her group chat with her colleagues. To my surprise, there wasn't much there. Just a string of messages discussing another corporate outing, set to take place at a new cottage. The excitement in their words was evident. They seemed thrilled, but I couldn't understand why. The address for the event was listed in the chat, along with plans for food, drinks, and activities. It all seemed innocent enough, but something about their enthusiasm felt out of place. What could make a group of professionals this eager for what sounded like just another work event? I shook my head, unable to make sense of it. With no clear answers there, I moved on to check her private messages. That's when I saw it, a conversation with the rich kid from the party. My jaw tightened as I opened the thread. His last message was recent, asking her why she'd stopped attending their gatherings. "Why did you and your husband leave so abruptly that night?" he'd written. My heart sank as I read her reply. She'd been honest with him, saying, "My husband doesn't approve of me hanging out with you all. He's strict about these things, so I have to listen to him." Her tone was neutral, but the content stung. It wasn't the fact that she'd explained herself, it was the dynamic her words painted. His response was exactly what I'd expected. He reassured her, calling me controlling and backward. "Things can always change," he added. "We'll be here if you ever need us. You know the address." My hands clenched as I read those words. It was clear he thought he had an opening, that he was waiting for the right moment to exploit it. That only solidified my resolve. I exited the app and put the phone back where I'd found it. As I sat there, I considered my next steps. Her behavior had made it clear that something was going on, and now I had the address of their next gathering. The only question was how to proceed. Trust was already strained, and I knew confronting her without evidence would only make her defensive. I needed to act carefully. The following day, she mentioned her mother again, saying she planned to visit her and might be back late. Her tone was casual, almost too casual, as if she were testing how much I'd probe. I nodded and acted like it didn't bother me. "Take your time," I said. If she was lying, I needed to know for sure. After she left, I started doing my own research. My first step was to look into divorce attorneys. It wasn't something I wanted, but I knew I had to prepare for the possibility. If her actions confirmed my suspicions, I wouldn't waste any time. I jotted down a few names and made a mental note to call them if it came to that. For now, I had to stay focused. That evening, I decided to confirm her story. I picked up the phone and called her mother directly. "Hey, just checking in," I said. "How are you feeling?" Her voice was warm as she replied, "I'm fine, thank you. Your wife is here now. She's in the bathroom, but everything's good." Relief washed over me. At least for tonight, her story checked out. I hung up, leaning back in my chair. For now, it seemed like things were as she'd said. But I couldn't ignore the bigger picture. Her behavior, the messages, the cottage plans, it all felt connected. I'd need to stay vigilant. All right, I thought to myself, we'll see where this goes. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting me out of a light sleep. The number was unfamiliar, but I picked up anyway. On the other end, a man's voice, slurred and laughing hysterically, told me I needed to get over to a party immediately. "You have to see what your wife is up to," he said between bouts of laughter. "Trust me, you'll want to be here. It'll be hilarious." His tone and the situation felt off, and my mind instantly went to the worst possibilities. Without wasting a second, I grabbed my keys and headed for the car. The drive was tense, my grip on the steering wheel tightening with every mile. The address he gave was out in the middle of nowhere, the same cottage I'd seen mentioned in the group chat. By the time I arrived, I was on high alert. The guy who called me met me at the door, still laughing and clearly drunk. He gestured for me to follow him inside, his demeanor smug and taunting. I didn't like it, but I kept my cool and followed. The scene I walked into was worse than anything I could have imagined. There she was, my wife, in the middle of it all, surrounded by 6 men. The laughter and chaos in the room drowned out everything else, but my focus was razor sharp. I didn't make a sound, I just pulled out my phone and started recording. My hands were steady as I captured every detail. They were so absorbed in their debauchery that they didn't even notice me standing there. Eventually, one of the men, the same guy who'd led me inside, caught sight of me filming. His expression shifted from amusement to panic as he lunged for my phone. I sidestepped his grab and landed a solid punch to his face. He stumbled back and fell to the floor, clutching his nose. The room fell silent for a brief moment as the reality of my presence sank in. I turned to my wife, who had finally noticed me. Her face contorted with rage and embarrassment. "What the hell are you doing here?" she screamed. "You have no right to invade my privacy like this." Her words were like gasoline on a fire. "Your privacy?" I shot back, my voice cold and measured. "You call this a private moment? Fine, go ahead. Continue. Don't let me stop you." She opened her mouth to argue, but I'd already turned and was heading for the door. As I reached my car, I grabbed the bear spray I kept in the glove compartment. It was a precaution I'd never thought I'd use for something like this. The cottage had an open window on the side, just enough to provide access without drawing attention. I approached quietly, shaking the canister as I went. Peering through the window, I could see the chaos starting to resume inside. Perfect! Without hesitation, I began spraying the bear deterrent through the window, making sure to cover as much of the room as possible. The effect was immediate. Coughing and shouting erupted from inside as people scrambled to escape the stinging cloud. Some fell over furniture in their panic, while others clawed at their eyes, trying to find relief. I stayed long enough to ensure the spray had done its job before walking calmly back to my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, I watched the scene unfold through the rearview mirror. People were stumbling out of the cottage, gasping for air, their night thoroughly ruined. A small, satisfied smile crept onto my face. With the recording safely stored on my phone and the chaos behind me, I started the engine and drove away. The night had taken an unexpected turn, but I felt no remorse. Justice, in my mind, had been served. When I arrived back home, I didn't waste a second. The betrayal was fresh in my mind, and I wasn't about to let the night's events linger in my home any longer. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed my wife's belongings, and started stuffing them into garbage bags. Clothes, shoes, makeup, everything went in without a second thought. The anger in me burned hotter with every item I tossed. This wasn't just about clearing space, it was about reclaiming my dignity. Once the bags were full, I didn't stop there. I carried them to the window, yanked it open, and started throwing them out onto the lawn. One after another, they landed in a messy pile outside. The sight of her things scattered like trash felt oddly satisfying, a physical representation of what I thought of her betrayal. I was mid-throw with another bag when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up to the house. I looked outside and saw headlights illuminating the yard. The car doors slammed, and my wife stepped out, followed by a couple of the same men I'd seen at the cottage. They were yelling before they even got close to the door. I could hear their voices rising, accusing me of overreacting and demanding I let her back in. One of the men had the audacity to shout, "You're being unreasonable. She loves you, and you need to work this out." Their arrogance was staggering. I stepped outside, my expression cold and unyielding. "Work this out?" I said, my voice cutting through their noise. "You expect me to stay married to someone who's been cheating on me, and you think I'll just accept it?" Another one of them chimed in, "If you don't, we'll make sure you regret it. This is your last chance to fix this." At that moment, one of them, likely emboldened by the others, said something about setting my house on fire if I didn't comply. That was enough for me. I didn't waste time arguing. I turned, walked back into the house, and grabbed my shotgun from the cabinet. When I stepped back outside, their bravado evaporated almost instantly. I aimed low, deliberately shooting into the dirt just inches from one of their feet. The sound was deafening, and the smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. He jumped back, stumbled, and nearly fell over himself trying to get away. The others were already retreating, their courage gone. "You want to try that again?" I asked, my voice calm but laced with menace. They didn't answer. Instead, they hurried back to their car, fumbling with the doors before peeling out of the driveway. I watched them go, ensuring they were well out of sight before lowering the gun. It was obvious their threats had been empty, but I'd made my point. This was my house, and I wasn't about to let anyone dictate what I should tolerate. A few hours later, she returned alone. Her shoulders slumped, and her face was streaked with tears as she stood in the yard, picking up her scattered belongings. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Don't do this to us." I stood at the doorway, arms crossed, unmoved by her pleas. "There's no us," I said firmly. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. This marriage is over." She begged for a second chance, but my decision was final. Her actions had destroyed any trust I'd had in her, and no amount of apologies or promises could undo that. As she gathered the last of her things, I turned and went back inside, closing the door behind me. My mind was clear. I'd be filing for divorce first thing in the morning, and there would be no turning back. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive, thanks to the video evidence I brought to court. When the judge saw the footage, there wasn't much left for debate. Her infidelity was undeniable, and it played a significant role in the final ruling. As a result, I came out ahead, keeping the majority of our shared assets and leaving her with the bare minimum. It was a harsh outcome for her, but I had no sympathy left to spare. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. After the house was sold, I moved into a modern apartment that suited my needs perfectly. It was spacious, well-lit, and in a good part of town. Setting up a new life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I focused on my work and making the place feel like home. The freedom of being on my own again was refreshing, a clean slate after the chaos of the past few months. For a while, it felt like I could finally move on. But my ex-wife wasn't done making my life difficult. Not long after the dust settled, she launched a smear campaign among my family members. She claimed I doctored the video evidence using neural networks, accusing me of digitally altering her face to frame her for cheating. The accusations were absurd, but she said them with enough conviction to make some people listen. My sister and mother were the first to approach me about it, their concerns evident. "She's saying you manipulated the video," my sister said, her tone hesitant. "And that you hurt her." The implication hung in the air, and I could feel my temper rising. I kept my response measured but firm. "You've known me your entire life," I said. "Do you really believe I'd do something like that?" My mother's silence stung, but I could see the doubt she was wrestling with. My father, on the other hand, saw through her lies immediately. "She's a manipulative liar," he said bluntly. "Don't let her get under your skin." His unwavering support was a relief, but the damage her words had caused was already done. I found myself embroiled in heated arguments with my family, defending my actions and my integrity. It was exhausting, but I refused to let her narrative take root. Eventually, I took matters into my own hands. I gathered evidence to disprove her claims, including technical reports verifying the authenticity of the video. I presented everything to my family in a calm, straightforward manner, making it clear that her accusations were baseless. The turning point came when I pointed out her lack of any real proof to back up her story. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. My mother and sister apologized once they realized the truth. They admitted they'd been swayed by her emotional manipulation and regretted doubting me. "We should have trusted you from the start," my mother said, her voice heavy with guilt. My sister, who'd been the most vocal in questioning me, took a month-long break from our relationship to process everything. It was a tense period, but I gave her the space she needed. When we eventually reconnected, the conversations were lighter, more genuine. The rift that my ex-wife had tried to create was healing. My sister reached out first, and we talked through everything in a way we hadn't been able to before. "I'm sorry for not believing in you," she said. I let her get in my head. I assured her that we could move forward, and we did. Rebuilding those relationships took time, but it was worth the effort. My family had always been important to me, and I wasn't about to let her lies destroy that bond. By the end of it all, we were stronger for having gone through it. The experience was a reminder of how easily trust can be shaken, but also how it can be restored when the truth comes to light. After everything that had happened, I wasn't about to let my ex-wife walk away unscathed. She'd tried to destroy my reputation among my family and left me no choice but to defend myself. But there was still one final card I had to play. The video evidence I'd used in court held more than just proof of her infidelity. It also exposed the other participants, including someone I'd recognized as the wife of her boss. That detail stuck with me, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I sat down and composed an email to her boss, attaching the video as proof. The message was concise but clear. I explained that this footage involved members of his team, including his wife, and suggested he review it carefully. It wasn't about revenge for its own sake, it was about consequences. People who engaged in such behavior, especially in professional circles, had to be held accountable. Once the email was sent, I leaned back and waited, confident that the fallout would be swift. It didn't take long to get a response. Her boss called me directly the next morning, his tone a mix of anger and disbelief. He confirmed that he'd seen the video and thanked me for bringing it to his attention. I had no idea, he admitted. This is unacceptable, and I'll be taking immediate action. His words were firm, and I could tell he meant it. He didn't try to downplay the situation or make excuses. It was clear that he intended to clean house. Within a week, the company made drastic changes. Nearly everyone involved in the video was let go, including my ex-wife. The only employees who stayed were those who hadn't participated in the event. While some might argue that losing so many people at once could hurt the company, her boss seemed determined to rebuild with fresh talent. From what I heard, they quickly hired replacements and moved forward without much disruption. It was a calculated risk, but one he was willing to take. The fallout extended beyond the workplace. My ex-wife's social circle began to unravel as the truth came to light. Those who had initially supported her started distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. She'd built her image on charm and manipulation, but now that facade was cracking. It was clear she hadn't expected her actions to have such far-reaching consequences. She didn't take it well. One evening, she called me in a fit of rage. "How could you do this?" she screamed over the phone. "You've ruined my life. You took away my job, my friends, everything. You're a monster." Her voice was shrill, and I could hear the frustration and desperation behind her words. But I remained calm. "You did this to yourself," I replied. "If you think you can betray people and walk away without consequences, you're mistaken. Consider this a lesson." Her anger shifted to self-pity. She tried to blame me for her loss of variety in life, as she put it, and accused me of being vindictive. "You're just bitter because I moved on," she said, trying to flip the narrative. But her words didn't hold any weight. I'd already moved on emotionally and wasn't about to let her guilt trip me into feeling otherwise. I ended the conversation on a firm note. "You wanted freedom, and now you have it," I said. "You're free to live with the consequences of your actions. Don't call me again." And with that, I hung up. It felt like closing a door on a chapter of my life that had dragged on far too long. I wasn't angry anymore, I was simply done. In the days that followed, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she was struggling to find a new job. Her reputation had taken a hit, and companies were hesitant to hire someone with such baggage. Meanwhile, I focused on my work and my life, content with the knowledge that I'd done what needed to be done. It wasn't about revenge, it was about setting things right and ensuring she couldn't continue her manipulative ways unchecked. Looking back, I felt a sense of closure. She'd tried to undermine me at every turn, but in the end, her own actions had been her undoing. I'd moved on, and so had my life. The lesson was clear: actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what's needed to bring about justice. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, my ex-wife eventually tried to reconnect with that rich kid she'd been so taken with. It didn't surprise me, she'd always had a knack for trying to land on her feet, even after burning bridges. According to the rumors, she thought she could pick up where they left off, but life had other plans. Whatever illusion she'd built about him being some kind of savior quickly fell apart when she realized he wasn't interested in any sort of loyalty. The story went that he cheated on her not long after they started seeing each other again. Typical behavior for someone like him, all charm and no substance. When she found out, he didn't even bother to deny it. Instead, he left her high and dry, moving on to his next conquest without a second thought. It was poetic, in a way. She'd betrayed me for someone who ended up treating her with even less respect. I couldn't muster much sympathy for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was reaping the rewards. It was clear that the fallout from her actions wasn't something she'd planned for. As much as I might have wanted to feel satisfaction at her misfortune, I found that I simply didn't care anymore. By that point, I'd moved on with my life and left all of that drama in the past where it belonged. Apparently, after things fell apart with him, she packed up and went to stay with her mother. That, too, didn't surprise me. Her mom had always been her fallback whenever life didn't go her way. It made sense that she'd retreat there once her plans fell apart. As far as I knew, she was still there, trying to figure out her next move. I hadn't seen or heard from her in months, and I had no intention of changing that. In some ways, it was a relief to have her completely out of my life. The silence was refreshing after everything we'd been through. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could focus entirely on myself without worrying about her schemes or drama. My life was simpler now, and I intended to keep it that way. Whatever path she chooses from here on out, it's her business. I've washed my hands of the situation, and I'm content to leave it behind. People like her and that rich kid always end up chasing their own tails, creating messes they can't clean up. Meanwhile, I've moved forward, and that's all that matters to me now.